Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the Last Round Podcast, episode 93 of the traditional episodes. Obviously, like we talked about in the past, Mike, we're actually over 100. I think we're like at 114 or something if you include the shows we do at events here in the Southern California and Las Vegas territories, of course. But once again, guys, we appreciate you guys listening, whether you guys are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, Boxing Socials, YouTube, wherever you're at, however you're listening, we obviously appreciate it. But, coming off the heels of a couple cards yesterday or this past weekend in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Connecticut, across the pond in Mike's homeland, of course. But this week, we have somebody who was actually in those fights at the Matchroom fights. He was calling the Carl Frampton fight yesterday as well, or this past weekend. Sky Sports' Andy Clarke joins us this week. How you doing, Andy?
Good, thanks, fellas. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. So, obviously you were there. You were in the thick of it. How was the whole situation? How was the whole COVID testing the last, the week leading up to the fight? Can you talk about the process?
Well, luckily for me, I didn't have to go into the bubble. So basically what happens is that the fighters and the trainers, and their designated person, I think they can have two, basically. I've seen the lists and some fighters seem to have two. Most of them generally have one. They'll arrive on Tuesday for a Friday show, probably Tuesday again this week anyway for the Saturday coming. They get tested. That's kind of late morning. Then they'll go into their rooms and they quarantine until the next morning, until the results come back. And then they get an envelope passed under their door, and everybody has passed so far. So I don't know what would happen if someone was failed. I guess they would just get kind of surgically removed somehow. And then they're fine then, and they're just in that environment. And I was down at the Holiday Inn where it is in Brentwood yesterday, and there's kind of it's all very hazmat, in that scene in E.T. where they've got the kind of big veil everywhere and walkways and stuff like that. It's all taken very seriously. And for the broadcasters, for us, I can just come in on the day. You don't mix with the athletes. Everything's zoned off when you get to Matchroom headquarters. So you can't really go anywhere. The two sets of people can't really go anywhere near each other. It's just the officials. And then they just rinse and repeat it for the next week. It's very kind of well drilled now. They've got it down to a fine art. And fight camp was great. It's the first week I've been because of limited numbers, but it looks spectacular when you get there. And it's all just set up really, really efficiently. You know what boxing shows are like. Usually it takes a bit of time to get in, or it's not down, or it's not on the right list, or you haven't quite got something happens, doesn't it? A lot of the time. And with this, you just straight in. You get your temperature taken, straight in, get your wristband. There's no crowds to kind of work through. It's very clear where everything is. So kind of logistically and conditions-wise, it's probably the most straightforward thing I've ever done, apart from the fact that you're set back from the ring. But I'm kind of used to that from covering international amateur tournaments. But yeah, it was great. It was just great to be back at Ringside. I've done some stuff over the last few months, but most of it's been remote.
Andy, you actually did do I think it was the first show in Europe that had a crowd. Was it like a week or 2 weeks ago? Yeah,
that's right. Mid-July, it was in Magdeburg. It was a German card for ESPN Plus. I was doing that for. Agit Kabayel was top of the bill against Evgeny Lazaridis. So I went over for that. And similar kind of thing. They were a little bit more relaxed about the whole thing, to be honest, because I arrived on Friday for that, and we were in the same hotel as the boxers. And I didn't seek any of them out because I thought I'm probably not really supposed to, but no one really would have stopped me if I had. But Yeah, that was outdoors as well. A similar kind of setup, a concert venue with like big green fields and a lake either side of it. The ring walk ramp went over a lake. It was quite great. And yeah, 525 people at that, socially distanced. And yeah, we were right up by Ringside for that too. So Germany have dealt with the whole thing better than we have in the UK. Most people have dealt with it better than we have, quite honestly. And so they're just kind of ahead of us. And that was a month ago. Yeah, that was a month ago, and they had 500. And that was probably half full. So the fact that it was outdoors, I guess, helped. But it does make you kind of hopeful that we might get some crowds back before too long.
Andy, I kind of wanted to turn the clock back a little bit and see, growing up, did you always want to be a commentator? Because it's a very unique job. Me and Danny were kind of just speaking about it before you came on air, because there's not many commentator jobs. So I was saying to Danny, you must have been quite kind of confident, that the timing was going to be right, because there's only, one commentator for Sky Sports, one for BT, one for Showtime, one for HBO. So to get that position is very unique.
Yeah, so what I did was I didn't have any real firm idea of what I wanted to do for a job when I was a kid or anything like that. Probably like you two, I wanted to be a professional sportsman of some description, and I played a lot of sport, and I was good, but I wasn't that good, so that wasn't going to happen. I was obsessed with sport, absolutely loved sport, loved everything about it, and so when I left university, I didn't really, again, I still didn't really have a firm idea of what I wanted to do. And that was 20 years ago. And that was kind of fine then. Most people didn't. I didn't do a vocational degree. I studied classics. So that's Latin and ancient Greek and classical civilization and that kind of thing. And I did that because I thought it was really interesting. And so there was never a real possibility for me that I wasn't going to pursue a job that I was really interested in. And luckily for me, given my kind of family circumstances, my old man did really well for himself, just a like normal working class guy, but did really well. My mum too. And so I was able to indulge myself and chase a kind of dream job because I knew that they would back me through it and help me out if things got difficult. And you can't really, it's one of the problems with our industry, I think, is that unless you've got that kind of safety net, then it makes it really hard to pursue these kinds of jobs, and that's not right. But that's a whole other conversation. So luckily for me, I could, and just wrote a lot of letters. Got in at a radio station, the one I was working for last night, actually, strangely, and then that wasn't that hard a thing to do because there were loads of radio stations carrying comprehensive sport. It's much different now. There are nowhere near the same amount. And so I got in one there, and then you just learn the job basically, and you just went and covered, and that took a while. And go from making the tea to it's the same route in for everybody really. You start right on the bottom rung, and then just learned the job and went and covered whatever I was told to, and bit by bit you get more experience, and bit by bit you can try and home in on the sport you would really want to cover. But the idea of doing that from the beginning was absolutely laughable. I mean, you can try and do it now because you've got the online platform available to talk about what you want to talk about, but it's more difficult to get that kind of schooling in how you go about it, I guess. And I kind of segued from radio to TV, and I just homed in on boxing. I just really wanted to go all in on boxing. And it was a bit of a gamble. The whole career is a bit of a gamble, to be honest. And you do get past a point of no return where you just think, I could retrain and do something else now if this all went wrong, but I really don't want to. And I don't even really want to think about it. So you don't kind of allow yourself to contemplate comprehensive failure too often, or although it's always a possibility, like
right.
It's lurking there in the background. Anyone who says it's not is talking absolute bollocks. And yeah, it's just perseverance and really, really wanting to do it, I think. And if you keep going at it long enough, then you will find that circumstances will at some point be in your favour. People talk about right time, right place, and I believe in that. But the simple fact is, if you put yourself in a place enough times, sooner or later, that it will be the right time and the right place. And once you're in a small world like boxing, it's hard to get in, but once you're in a small world like boxing, then you're kind of in then, really. Getting in is hard. But I was covering football, which I did for a long time, and I loved that. It was great. There's lots more work. So getting work there is easier, but standing out is a lot harder. I mean, I think most people I know did it kind of that way. They started in radio and they came through. And quite a lot of the people who started at the same time as me, we've all stuck with it. And everyone's doing pretty well. It's a test of stamina more than anything else, I think, like most things.
Was there any jobs that you were doing when you were kind of doing the internship where you were like, man, I don't know whether this is worth this?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always really enjoyed it, but I went free when I was at TalkSport to start with. You did what you were told, you did whatever it was. So I did quite a lot of production to start with, and it was a really interesting place to work because it was run by Kelvin McKenzie at that point. That'll mean nothing to you, Danny, but Michael will probably might recognize the name. He was editor of The Sun in the 80s. A tabloid journalist guy. And his kind of lieutenants came to radio with him. He was, one of Rupert Murdoch's guys in the 80s when Rupert Murdoch just did the English tabloid journalism, which he did for quite a while after that. So these were kind of, old school, no nonsense, pretty unpleasant characters some of the time, or could be. They were quite cutthroat and could be very harsh. So it was quite an old-fashioned kind of schooling in that sense, but you definitely learned a lot. And I didn't really come out of it with any scars. I mean, you learned to develop a fairly thick skin, to be honest. But that was definitely a good place to start, as good as any, I think, really.
Andy, you talked about the point of no return in your career. Like, you get to that point and you're just like, you know what, I just got to keep going. For you, how old were you at that point, or when did you really realize, like, okay, you look back and you're just like, you know what, I can't go back now. I got to keep going because I'm too far into it.
I think it was probably I started when I was 22. I would have been 23, and it was probably about 10 years after that, because I went freelance in 2006, 2007. And to answer your original question about jobs I really didn't want to do, that was when they cropped up, because you all of a sudden just have to make money, basically. And I had one shift I had to do, which required me to get on 2 night buses across London, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get on 2 night buses across London to do an early morning bulletin shift, which was hard. Like, it was a lot of stuff for 50 quid. And that wasn't that long ago. Like, the guy who ran that place was a bit of a genius, because he knew that there was quite a lot of young freelancers out there who needed that experience and money, and he gave you that. But the quid pro quo for him was that he paid you as little as humanly possible for it, to be honest. But that's what happens when you're younger. Like, you know you're getting shafted, but you work out whether the benefit of it for you is worth it. And I thought it was, although every day at the bus stop I'd say to myself, that's it, I'm never doing this again. But so, about 3 or 4 years after that, probably, I just thought, okay, I'm early 30s now. I am making some progress. But then you still have further setbacks that makes you kind of question the whole thing. I remember vividly covering the London Olympics, which was brilliant, and that was a gig at a time of year where then I was doing half football, half boxing, really, and that was a gig at a time of year where you didn't really have that much to do. So, and you're working every day, and you're on quite a good rate, and it's your hometown, and it's the Olympics, and it's amazing. And I was thinking, God, this is fantastic! Like, I'll do this usually in a fallow period. Then as soon as this finishes, I'll be back at Sky, because at that point I was doing football and boxing for Sky, Premier League football and some undercards for Sky Boxing. I thought, this is it. Like, I'm set now for the first time since I started doing this. Things are really look solid. And then halfway through the Olympics, I got an email from Sky Football saying they didn't need me the next season. And then about a week after the Olympics finished, I got a phone call from Adam Smith, who's head of Sky Boxing then, still involved now, of course, that said, look, I'm really sorry, my budget's been cut in half, and I don't need you this season for boxing. And I remember literally sinking to my knees in my living room. Like, I know it sounds like a massive cliche, but I actually did. I sank to my knees and just thought, like, what? This should not have happened. Like a few weeks ago, everything was looking brilliant, and now I'm fucked. It was far too close to the start of the new football season for me to pick up anything else. And it is an up and down. It's ups and downs. But you just got to be able to. You've got to be the kind of person who can cope with that. Basically, if you're not, then it's really not for you, because pretty much all gigs are. 80% of them now will be freelance. There aren't that many staff jobs, and you've just got to be able to learn to laugh it off and not let it affect your overall confidence too much. I mean, I do know people who are freelance doing what I do, who didn't used to be, and it is not for them really temperamentally, but they've got no choice. Like they might have had jobs at the BBC for years or somewhere else for years, and then they cut down on staff, and it's not doing them any good. And I can see it's not doing them any good, but they have no choice but to kind of continue with it. And I don't know. They just seem like people on the edge a lot of the time. For me, and I do sympathise, but luckily for me, I think sort of temperamentally, I'm okay with it. I've kind of always been all right with it.
When did you get your first break in boxing? What was the first fight that you covered?
So the first thing I did was actually for Sky, because I was doing football at Sky. So a mate of mine was working in the boxing department, who I used to work at TalkSport with. And of course, the longer you do things, that's how it works. You know someone who's gone on to do something else. He put in a word for me, and they got me to York Hall to do some undercards. And the main event was Lee Purdy defending his British welterweight title against Colin Lyons. It was midweek. Full house, great. I did some fights on the undercard, and kind of took it from there, really. I mean, I didn't realise it at the time, but my sort of knowledge my boxing knowledge was okay, but I quickly realised that it was nowhere near good enough to be a commentator. No one really noticed, because you kind of clock that and you think, right, until I do something about this, I need to just not overreach and expose myself, basically. With reading a fight and knowing what was happening in the ring, I was fine with that, because I wasn't like the finished article, but I'd watched loads of boxing, and I've always had a good feel for the action, whatever sport it is. But I realised my background knowledge was just nowhere near up to where it needed to be. But you could do something about that. So I just kind of did that until I could get out to gyms more and do all the rest of it, which luckily in boxing is, one of the great things about it is that's a astonishingly easy thing to achieve.
Did you practice like watching old fights?
Yeah, I would watch old fights. I mean, I was already commentating on football for Sky, and that was quite a big platform. So that was like for the Premier League, going around the world and stuff. So I could do that, the mechanics of it. I think they knew that they'd got someone who could already do that, and I've been learning that for about 10 years. Radio and TV are different, but they're not that different. Ian Darker used to do the boxing with Sky. I always thought he was very good, and I've never really kind of been one to hold up other people and think, oh no, I must do it like that, because you've got to find your own voice and style and all the rest of it. But boxing is different, though. It is a lot different from football, because it's a lot different from most sports, I would imagine, because you are required to interpret what is happening. There's no score in the top corner of the screen, and that's what makes for debate every week, doesn't it? You've got to do more than just. They describe it as blow by blow in the States, don't they? The lead commentator, in principle, is what it is, but it's more than that. And it took me a while to work out, to be honest, just quite how involved and complicated it is compared to other sports. But it was too late by then. I was in by then.
Like you said, you can go to the gyms and it's quite easy. Boxers and people in boxing world are quite easy to kind of connect with. Do you find it hard sometimes to commentate on fights where you have a good relationship with the fighter?
Not really. I think boxers are friendly with everybody, really. So they'll give everybody kind of the same amount of time. But I'm quite careful not to, I would never text a fighter or WhatsApp a fighter except to arrange a gym visit. I don't text them and say well done if they've won or commiserations if they've lost or anything like that. I take that side of it seriously. You can still be friendly. You can still be perfectly friendly and on good terms. But I guess I think I'm probably quite strict with what I define as friendship anyway. It's a kind of relative term, isn't it? There's lots of people I know and like, but I wouldn't necessarily say we were friends because I think you have to know someone well for that. That's just my own kind of take on it. So no, I find it quite straightforward. You always know that at some point they're going to take something that you say that isn't in any way personally. They just will, and I'm fine with that because how can they not? It's it's their career, it's their life. They put everything into it, and that's the only thing I ever say to fighters if they say to me, "Oh, you said this and that and the other." I'll just say, "Look, you can come and talk to me about whatever I say whenever you want, but just know that whatever I do say, it's not. I'm never looking to criticise. It's not personal. It doesn't mean I don't like you. It doesn't mean I don't want you to do well. It's just what I said at the time. Because I think if you're an individual athlete and you're getting a bit of stick for a performance, then I'd sort of defy anybody not to be pretty riled up by that. At least sometimes.
And has that happened yet?
Yeah, it's happened a few times. It's never been any kind of an issue. It's always been done, I would say, kind of the right way. A couple have emerged which I weren't aware of. Calify got a bit upset with me after a fight he had in America. I think his defence against Norberto Jimenez, where I thought he was a bit lacklustre and said that basically he wasn't very happy with that. I only discovered that when me and Matt Macklin went up to Birmingham to do a podcast with him, and we talked about it. And I just said exactly what I just said to you there, and it's no one can really have too much of an issue with that, I don't think, because if you quite obviously don't have any favourites, then it's quite straightforward, really, for people to be able to look at you and realise that, okay, this is just how it is. He's got that job, and his job is to talk about what I do. But none of us are ever really out to unnecessarily get stuck into people. I mean, you encounter commentators, journalists in all kinds of areas who do seem to want to sort of make it their thing to be the one who says spiky stuff, but that's not really for me. I mean, I think if it's required, if it's relevant and necessary, then you say what you need to. But there aren't many circumstances in which I feel I really need to heavily criticise a fighter, because I think the only thing you could ever reproach a professional athlete for really is just not having prepared properly or not trying. And in boxing, in sport generally, to accuse them of not trying, I think is very naive, because they're all trying. Doesn't mean that you can't criticise application level sometimes, but that really for me is the only kind of thing that is worthy of real censorship. Not being good enough, I mean, that's an entirely different thing, isn't it? We'd all like to be better at everything, so you can't hammer someone for turning out not to be, maybe as good as you thought they were going to be.
You actually spoke about that on the podcast, right? Was it you and Calify?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
I listened to it. Yeah. Another one, being a commentator, the one thing that's always all over Twitter and everybody who listens, how do you avoid the A-side bias? Because people seem to make out like Matchroom just come and give you a sheet and they're like, right, you need to say this and you need to say this fighter's going to win and he's the best thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, you say, how do I avoid it? According to a lot of people, I don't. That's what you get every week. I find that really, really easy. Like, having covered sport for a really long time, I genuinely, I'm a Manchester United fan. I used to cover them quite a bit. It never used to bother me in the slightest. I knew other people who found it quite difficult to cover their own teams. And, with UK fighters, with fighters, you want the best for them. You want their career to be a success and for them to fulfill their dreams and all the rest of it. But on fight night, I think boxing is easier than other sports like this too. But on fight night, you want the person who deserves to win. If there is one, it can be a really close fight, obviously. But you want the person who deserves to win on that night to win, to get the decision. Because it's just criminal when they don't. You even though you don't know the person as well as one may be, you still know because you go to gyms, etc., and you speak to fighters. You still know what they're putting into it. And to see someone who's obviously done that not get it, that's all you want. You just want whoever deserves to get it. And it is an interesting one. I've worked for pretty much every promoter in the UK and a few worldwide. No one has ever come to me and told me, you must say this or you must not say that. Never. Eddie Hearn's never done it. I did Sauerland cards for a while and I had about 5 in a row where I scored against the home fighter and Kalla and Nissa would just make a joke out of it. And they never said to me, do you want any chance you can stop doing that? They promoters they've got other things to think about. So that just doesn't happen. But I think really it's not the kind of thing you can allow to bother you, or you'll go the other way. But yeah, I think it's a fairly easy an easy line to tread if you are careful with not identifying yourself too closely with individual athletes. I mean, if you're going to be forever on Twitter tweeting out pictures of yourself with your arm around people and stuff like that, then it doesn't mean that you will necessarily favour them in a fight, but it gives people ammunition to say, well, what about that then? That's why you need to be careful with all of that. And, Twitter I kind of use as a news feed really more than anything else. Other than that, it's I don't know, it's not really for me, I don't think.
It's kind of good that you touched on the scorecards. It was kind of a good weekend after that Roland Romero scorecard and the McCaskill Cecilia Braekhus, because you are actually the unofficial scorecard for Sky Sports. Is that right?
Yeah. So if I'm not commentating, then yeah, I'm doing it next weekend on the pay-per-view cards. I do the scorecards. Yeah, I haven't seen McCaskill Braekhus. Was it bad, that one, or?
It was a close. I can kind of see why they gave it to McCaskill. But I think it's just one of those where you kind of thought that with, where they say you have to kind of take the title from the champion. It was very close. But the Rolando Romero one was
that sounded terrible. Yeah,
that was terrible scorecard. One of them scored like 118, 110 to Romero as well. It was unusual.
Yeah, now, I mean, it is. I mean, you get those sometimes, and it's. I mean, boxing's, it's such an interesting sport in so many ways, and scoring is one of the things that makes it interesting. And the fact that you can get controversy does make it interesting. But at the same time, I do think that there are scorecards that are produced that are just not good enough. And there are certain things that you hear which, I just can never agree with. There's far too much bandying around of, it's subjective, it depends on what you like, and that can just paper over all manner of errors and sins. People say it to me all the time. They say, it's subjective. And to a degree, it is subjective. But there are some things that are right and there are some things that are wrong. Somebody tweeted me after Jonas Harper, and because I'd said after that, I actually had that 97-93 to Jonas, which is quite wide, but I don't give draw rounds. And I had 2 rounds that were really close, and I gave them both to Jonas. And I could have given them both to Harper, and if I had, I would have got a draw. So I said afterwards, I can see the draw, but I can't see the 96-94 to Harper. And someone said, that's only 1 round different. That's a ridiculous thing to say. If you can see the draw, then obviously you can see the 96-94. The close round is subjective. And I said, no, at a stretch, I can see 5 rounds to Harper. I can't see 6 to Harper, and you have to draw the line. You can't be saying it's subjective. It depends whether you like the person who's just marching forward. or you like the one who lands clean punches. For me, that's a complete no-brainer. It's the person doing the clean work is the one who should get the credit, not the one just marching forward. Literally anyone can do that. But I'm not, it's about 50-50 when you talk to people when you talk to judges on that one, really. They'll reward aggression twice almost. And I find that a bit frustrating. And there are other schools of thought, and you just mentioned one there about if you're the challenger, you need to rip the title from the champion. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the champion has one privilege, which is that if it's a draw, they retain. Mm-hmm. Other than that, there should be nothing, because when that bell goes, the judges, that title's vacant when the bell goes, as far as there's the way I look at it. It's being fought for. There is no champion. There is no challenger. And when you hear people say that, you need to win and then some to dethrone a champion, or last week was another one. It's like, Jonas needed to win bigger than that because she's the challenger. And you just think, what kind of nonsense is that? Because otherwise, but people just accept it, don't they? People accept it in boxing, and it's just always been that way.
It's like boxing folklore.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you get any training before you accepted that role?
No, not really. You just kind of the best thing I did was I mentioned I did quite a lot of Sauerland cards, and I did a lot of AIBA boxing as well. And for those kinds of jobs, you're by yourself, and so you just have to trust yourself. You've got no one to refer to or ask, or I would never wouldn't look at my phone. So it's just what I see. So that was great practice, because you get to the fight and I'd give my score, because I think you should. People who are watching, I think you've got to do that. And sometimes you get to the end, and I just think, God, I hope I've got that right, because sometimes you don't really know, do you? And with AIBA bouts, you've got endless fights during the course of the day. They're only 3 rounds, of course, but you just get used to. You just work out your own system, basically, of what it is you're looking for, and what what your criteria are. And once you've got that, then and you think it stands the test of time. If you think you test it out and you're happy with it, and you discuss it with other people. Like I talk to judges and officials a lot. People have been doing this longer than me, for example, as well. Once you're happy with it, then you're all right, because you know what you're looking for. And sometimes you will still see something different to the majority, to the consensus. But I mean, that happens to us all, doesn't it?
But especially when you're doing AIBA.
Well, yeah. There weren't as many bad ones as people would think doing that, but there were still every now and again some cards where you just thought there is no level of incompetence that can explain that.
Andy, kind of going back to the whole judging, we're talking about the scorecards right now with the, Rolando Romero and stuff like that. Obviously, you've been at numerous boxing events and you've been right there in the arena, but I'm sure you also have the pleasure of having an actual screen right there to see the action on television as well. I mean, can you explain the difference? Because obviously we've seen scorecards from people, judges mostly, but even just fans in the buildings or people at ringside who don't have the luxury of having a television screen in front of them to see different angles, who might have a different scorecard as opposed to somebody who's watching on TV who has zoomed in shots, who has different angles. Can you kind of talk about those different aspects?
Yeah, sure. Because I've been doing that myself the last the first 2 fight camp weeks. I was watching at home on TV, scoring a few of the fights. Next week, my position will be quite far from the ring, so I haven't really made my mind up yet as to whether I'm going to watch the ring or watch the TV. So basically, the main difference is that if you're ringside, then I always just watch the ring, because you're close enough to be able to do that. And the key is, because you are that close, you'll get blindsided sometimes, but you'll be able to see most things. And you can also get a real sense of how heavily something has landed, which obviously is really, really important, because it's not about how many punches you land. It's about the aggregate kind of weight of them over the course of the round. If you watch it on TV, then you will get a much better 360 view of what has actually happened, but you don't get the same appreciation of how heavily things have landed. And when you watch a fight, you will sometimes see, and I've seen it myself when I've watched fights I've commentated on back, you'll see someone land a solid shot, clear as day on the TV, and the commentators don't say a word. And it's because I haven't seen it, because they'll be watching the ring. I do know some commentators who use the screen quite a lot. And I had to the other night because we were at quite a distance, but generally I just basically never do. I just watch the ring. And certainly if I'm judging, I definitely watch the ring, because that's what the judges have to do. But that's basically the difference between the two, is that if you watch on TV, you won't miss anything, but you won't really know what effect those punches have had. You might not see the face of a fighter, the body language of the fighter when they're on the ropes just above you, and you can see that body shot, it's hide it though they try to, that body shot has really got a piece of them. TV reveals a lot of things, but there are still some things that it doesn't, and that is definitely the main difference as to what has landed, what's done damage. And you get that at ringside, you don't get that on TV.
Andy, do you think they should change to 5 judges to try to water down bad scorecards?
No, not really. They did that with Aiba, and they had a sort of pretty decent run, Aiba, post-Rio. They changed all the officials up. But I don't think having more judges necessarily makes it any more likely that you're not going to get bad cards. I think the problem with the cards really is it's just the lack of consistency in what's communicated to the judges in regards to what they should be looking for. So what I look for basically is I have kind of 3 criteria. And like I say, I've discussed this at length with lots of officials. It's not something I came up with by myself. But first of all, you're looking for who lands the greater, as I term it, like tonnage of punches during a round, who does the most damage during a round. And another way to think about it is a computer game, 2 characters with energy bars. They're full at the start of the round, and you deplete that bar by landing shots. You know, little tippy tappies will take little chips off it. Big solid shot will take a nice chunk off it. You still got to try and figure out who you think has done that, and that's not easy, obviously. But whoever's bar is most full at the end of the round, they win the round, because that's what boxing is. That's what professional boxing is. It's about hitting your opponent and hurting them. That's what it's about. So that's how you win. Amateur boxing obviously is slightly different. If I've got them level on that score, then I'll go to defence. So we've landed the same tonnage, but you've made me miss more than I've made you miss. That means you win the round, the way I do it. If we're level on both of those two, then I'll go for more kind of ring craft, I guess, in that those are often rounds where very little has happened that might happen early in the fight. You're rarely going to get a blood and thunder round where lots has been landed and you can't make a decision as to who's landed more. So early in the fight, maybe nothing really happens in the round. And then I'm looking for who kind of manages to look like the boss in there, even though no one's really done anything, who's kind of put their man on the back foot and feinted and pressured and just dictated terms without really doing anything. Because you can win a round doing that. So that's how I look at it. But I know that quite a lot of people, they will almost flip 2 and 3 around, and rather than go with defence after attack, they'll then look for who is being more aggressive. But my problem with that is that being aggressive is fine, but it has to be effective. And if it's effective, then it's evaluated in box 1, surely. But a lot of people they just like the guy who comes forward or the woman who comes forward, and they give them a lot of credit for that. And it drives me insane, but it happens, and you can't really stop people doing it. And another key thing as well is, and this is something that people struggle with, I think, because a lot of people, when they're watching fights, they won't score it properly, basically. And that's not to say that they don't know what they're watching, but they won't score it round by round. And so they'll then get an idea of who they think has dominated the story of the fight. But they're watching one 36-minute long round in that case. And you will remember who has the bigger moments and who finishes more strongly, maybe. And that will give you the sense of who has won. But that's not how you score it. You're scoring 12 individual 3-minute fights, all of which exist independently of one another. And how you score one in no way influences or relates to how you score another one. So Danny can nick 6 rounds. You can batter him in the other 6, draw. And people might think that's not really fair, and they would have a case. But that's how you score it. And I think people struggle with that. Maybe there's room for judges giving more 10-8s without knockdowns, because at the minute, you can dominate and get a 10-9. You can just nick it and get a 10-9, and it's the same. And maybe it shouldn't be the same, but then, it's what's a 10-8? That's open to interpretation, and then we'd just be arguing about that instead. So I think the system's kind of okay. It's just the application of it sometimes.
Are you in favour of the replays?
Yeah, I think I am, because for things that are kind of yes and no answers, like was that a head clash or a punch? Was that punch late or not? Was that below the belt or not? Things like that where there is no grey area. It's not the interpretation of the referee. Either it was or it wasn't. And I think that's important, because every now and again, we had a British welterweight title fight here not that long ago. And Paddy Gallagher, an Irish fighter, landed a good punch, cut Chris Jenkins, who was the defending champion. And the fight got stopped, I think, a couple of rounds later due to that cut. And the referee thought it was a head clash. So technical decision went to the cards. Jenkins was ahead and he won. And he was wrong. And, referees could get things wrong, of course, but there's no need for that to happen. The British Boxing Board of Control don't seem to want to use them here, although, well, they don't use them here, but I mean, we had an extraordinary situation on the Lomachenko Campbell card with Julio Martinez and Charlie Edwards, where Suleiman was ringside and Martinez hit Charlie when he was on all fours down, and he did it that late that the referee, Mark Lyson, who's a really good ref, had already started to get into position so he could, do what he needs to do, get him to the neutral corner, get in a place where he can see them both pick up the count. And he was turning to go and do that when Martinez hit him when he was down, so he missed it. Completely missed it. He just turned around, just did a quick pirouette, and it literally happened as he did that. Turned around, and then Charlie's rolling around, and he's thinking, what happened there? Like, it just didn't seem that bad. And then he starts counting. Of course, once you started to count, you can't stop. But anyway, Suleiman saw it, and he decided, okay, well, I've got my replay screen, so I'm the El Jefe. I'm going to do something about it. And he did, and I was fine with it. I was all for it, but I did think that's exactly that kind of situation. That's why you should have them. Because the technology is literally right there at ringside, like we're sitting there with it. So I don't know, maybe they look at other sports sometimes and think that it's all made it a bit of a mess, because it has in football, to be honest. But in other sports, it really hasn't. Like I follow cricket closely, and in cricket, it works. And in boxing, for yes/no answers, where there's no interpretation involved, I think why not do it?
In terms of the replay question, Andy, you mentioned other sports, and sometimes it works in other sports and stuff. At least over here in American sports, with basketball, the NBA basketball and stuff like that, or baseball, certain teams or certain managers have a limited amount of challenges that they can challenge a play in order to look at a replay. Would you be in favor of like respective corners having a limited amount of challenges, or does it, or pretty much unlimited as long as it gets the call right?
I mean, I've never really thought about that. That is an interesting question, because otherwise you're just relying on the referee to decide that I'm not sure if that was low or not. I'm not sure about how I've seen that, so I need to have another look. Whereas in boxing, as we know, there can be things that they don't actually see, in which case it might need someone else to be able to kind of challenge. Referrals and corners is an interesting idea, so long as they could be done. It's about the speed of it, isn't it? I think that's the key thing, because really you've got to do it there and then. You can't do it between rounds, because unless it happens right at the very end of the round. I mean, that's an interesting idea. That is an interesting idea. But these are exactly the things I think that sanctioning bodies and the Board of Control here would be terrified of if they allowed it, because they'd just be thinking, well, people will then say, okay, well, we've got the technology now. Why can't we use it? Like I had a fighter last week, and he scored a perfectly legitimate knockdown. The referee ruled it a slip. I watched it back. He wasn't really very well positioned. He can't really have seen it. and that cost my guy the fight. So I should have been able to challenge that, like you say. And I just don't think they want to go down that road. I really don't.
Right.
The problem, like you say, I think, is the speed.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely the speed, but try to pick up the pace of the fight. But yeah, no, as you guys were talking about that, we've talked about this on the podcast before in terms of replays. Of course, it's a pretty consistent topic, especially with certain things that happen within the squared circle and stuff like that. But I've always thought about that. Other major sports give teams a certain amount of challenges, and sometimes there's called when they run out of challenges, they've used them all up for that specific game, and something happens where like they can't challenge it anymore, so the game just has to go. And maybe it was a wrong call, but you just have to deal with it and kind of go through it. But it's kind of like a checks and balances thing. But I've always thought it was an interesting topic to discuss within boxing as well.
Yeah, I agree. It is, and you have to have that limit, because otherwise people would just challenge everything, wouldn't they? And then everything gets disrupted far too much. Fans are always concerned about the flow of the sport, and I think in America, I think by nature, NFL and basketball, I think I'm probably safe in saying this, it's just more stop-start. That's what people are used to. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, particularly for football, that's what people lose their minds over, is the fact that they're made to wait for a decision. In cricket, it's less of a problem because that goes on all day. There's no kind of big hoo-ha about that. People just seem kind of fine with that as well. But with boxing, because it's so high octane, I mean, it's like anything. If people get used to it, and it makes things fairer and makes decisions better, then personally, I can't really see any reason why you can't use it in boxing for things where the action will stop anyway. So they clash heads and they spring apart, and one of them's cut, and the referee can just stop it, time out. Just need to have a look at the screen and see what happened there, see what it was. Or in that instance, he could actually leave it till the end of the round before he makes a decision, and he could do it between rounds. And if the fight doesn't have to be stopped as a result of it, they continue, they see the doctor, they continue, he can have a look between rounds and then tell the judges that was a clash, that was a punch, and tell the corners and that kind of thing. It's, I mean, the WBC, they do it, don't they? Because they can use it ringside in Nevada, I think, and they do open scoring, which again, the British Boxing Board of Control don't allow open scoring over here, which, I mean, I'm not bothered about open scoring either way, to be honest. I can see the kind of upsides to it. I can see the downsides to it as well. I'd probably rather not have it in terms of the drama of the whole event, but some people like it.
Andy, what would you say is the biggest misconception of your job? I'm sure everyone thinks it's 5-star travel, hanging around with celebrities and fighters.
I think it's just that it is a lot of hanging around. It's a lot of killing time, waiting for people. I've spent a lifetime doing that, and fighters are not bad on the whole when it comes to punctuality, or at least if they're late, there's generally some kind of, because they're not all big superstars, obviously, as we know, and if they're late, then there'll be some kind of legitimate life reason for that, like they had to drop their kid off at school or feed their dog or whatever it is, or they're just a bit absent-minded, and I don't mind that, because what does it really matter to me if I have to hang around for another 45 minutes? I know if I'm going to a gym, then it's probably best to make that pretty much the only thing I'm doing that day, or at least for that half of the day. Whereas being kept hanging around by Premier League footballers when I was covering football, that was a little bit more annoying, because sometimes you could see that they just couldn't be bothered to be on time. Like they were sitting in the canteen and the press person was saying, "Can you come out and do this thing?" And they're basically just ignoring them. And we were just standing there. And in that situation, you do just think, hang on a second, like what is this really? But with fighters, they're just, they're very difficult to stay annoyed at, I think, boxers. I find them, they're good company, aren't they? And generally, if they're late or whatever, there'll be a reason for it. But that's mainly it. I've got no complaints about it other than that. And to be honest, that's not even really a complaint. I mean, it's not it's not some major hardship, is it? Just to sit in the corner of a gym for a bit. You listen to some people who've been doing it a little bit longer, maybe, or earlier in my career. You can speak to people who seem quite jaded with the whole scene, and they'd seen everything before, and they didn't seem to really enjoy it that much. And I just thought, wow, I'm never going to be one of you. If that happens to me, I'll just go and do something else, because that's not what this is about. If you're just going to bitch about this job all the time, then you really, really should go and do something else. But there aren't that many people around like that. You do get some fairly strange characters, I'm not going to lie. TV attracts some quite odd people. As commentators, we're all kind of stats geeks. That's just that you have to be one of them. It's you've got to love detail and things like that to an extent that most people don't. I do all the stats and the research for Sky. That's one of the other things I do. And I can happily spend all day doing that, just disappearing down wormholes on YouTube and checking out fighters who are like 5 opponents removed from the one I'm actually looking at. And it's just genuinely something I like doing. And that's lucky, because I discovered when I was covering football that I thought I had that level of interest in it. And then when it came to actually commentating on it and having to go a lot deeper than just reporting on it, I realised actually, kind of to my surprise, that I didn't. And I'd be sitting at home researching Stoke against Sunderland, and I'd get halfway through it and realise that I didn't really give a fuck. That's bad. That's really bad, because you have to really care. And I knew at that point, even though I was doing quite well, and I had the mechanics of the job, and the delivery and stuff like that, and the broadcasting side of it, I had that kind of pretty much not perfect, obviously, but down. I knew that there were other people who were into it in the way that I wasn't. They would do better than me. Ultimately, even if they weren't quite as good as me, even if they didn't sound quite as good as me, ultimately they would do better than me because of that enthusiasm. And then when I started covering boxing, it was just completely went the other way. I was kind of curious to see which way it would go, but right from the beginning, it was just, it's just the most. I mean, I was already following it, but when I really had to get into it up to my guts, it was just the best thing ever. I mean, there's just so many things about it that make it the best sport to cover.
When I was doing the show notes, I was doing some research, and obviously I put your name in Google, and up popped a video which I think shows how much you love boxing, that you offered to take a body shot from Dylan Whyte.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. So I was always curious about that, about body belts and stuff like that, because, like I said, when I was a kid, I played a lot of sport, and boxing was never in the equation because it wasn't in schools. None of my friends did it, and so it just never presented itself as being something that I would actually do. I wish I had, but it just wasn't. It wasn't in the conversation. I just played football and cricket. So I've always been very, very curious about boxing for a start. I did a bit of training in my mid-20s, no ambition whatsoever, because you from doing other stuff that you can't just take up a technically demanding sport. Never mind how physically demanding it is. You can't just take up a sport that technically demanding and expect to be any good at it unless you're going to give your next 10 years to it. And I clearly wasn't going to do that. So I really just did that just to see what it was like to be standing in there with someone trying to hit you back and just get, an understanding for the technique. But so when it came to going to gyms, I was always keen to do that. And I did it the year before down at Adam Booth's with Ryan Burnett, Josh Kelly, and Harlem Eubank. So they all had like a crack at me each. And the body belt was pretty solid. So you've got there like a bantamweight, super lightweight and a welterweight, and you could feel the difference between them. Although Burnett sort of hurt the most because he just seemed to get you right with those two knuckles in exactly the same place every time. I mean, he was a world champion at the time, so he was the best of the three, so that wasn't a great surprise. But with Dillian, I just said to Mark Tibbs, and any chance at the end of the session, and he just looked at me and just said, yeah, okay. And then he went and asked Dillian, and Dillian kind of shook his head and said, no. And then he said, who? And he said, oh, it's, Andy. I've always gone sort of fine. He just kind of grinned and just said, oh, yeah, okay. And the body belt was brand new, which was good. I could see it was brand new. Mark had just been wearing it. And I did just say to him, you are going to be sensible about this, aren't you? Because he said, yeah. And he actually, he wasn't insulted that I'd asked him, but he just said, yeah, like, this is no joke. What I could potentially do if I just slightly miss it. And I reckon on the final one, he probably hit me about, I think I said in the video, maybe 50%. I don't think it was probably. I think it was probably more like 35, 40. But those belts are mad. Like it doesn't hurt, but you feel it. Like have you had a go with one of them? They're
Lee Selby.
I took several shots from Lee Selby. Yeah,
weird feeling, isn't it? If you've got a decent one, if you've got Andy Scott did it with Luke Campbell, Andy's colleague of mine at Sky. He did it with Luke Campbell, and he said this body belt was just like, it was like a piece of kind of linen. He was like really old and there was hardly any padding in it. And Luke Campbell gave him a bit of a beat. It might have been Josh Taylor as well. I can't remember. And yeah, it didn't go that well for him. Like he said he had to go and throw up at Waterloo train station. Sort of a delayed reaction, but it was good. It was good. I like doing stuff like that. It's not going to be that long before I'm kind of too old to be making a spectacle of myself doing things like that. So I'll take it whilst I can get it.
And you also, Andy, like to have a little wager on some of the fights. And you said on your podcast recently that you made a good amount of money on the Josh Warrington against Lee Selby, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, so I don't bet on fights that I'm commentating on, but that's the kind of rule I've got. But I mean, you see some interesting odds in boxing because often bookmakers don't seem to really research overseas opponents all that much. So quite often you'll see someone come in, and I remember, I think the first Crolla-Linares fight, I'm pretty sure you could get Linares. I'd remember if I backed it, and sadly I didn't, but I'm pretty sure you could get Linares 13-8. And that's a really good example because Crolla's a good world champion, but Linares is, he's a kind of a level above, really, and he showed that in those two fights. But because he was coming from overseas and his record's a little bit sketchy in places, I mean, like the early defeats, every now and again he does something a bit odd. But I think, but that's a massive price on a fighter like that, and you see stuff like that every now and again. And yeah, Warrington was 7-2, and I thought that was a 50-50 because he was on great form and he was at home. And there were rumours about Selby with the weight, and of course, if you're in the sort of industry, you hear things that other people maybe don't know. And then I won some money on Bellew against David Hay, and that was a good example of if you're close to it, it's not insider trading exactly, but we all knew going into that second fight, really, just from watching the workout. I put my bet on after the workout that Hay was. I mean, he looked amazing physique-wise. But really, by that stage in his career, he was a physical wreck. It was all aesthetics because that's all he could have done during. He wasn't able to spar. He wasn't. He was falling apart by that point, and he'll admit that himself now happily. And Bellew at 2-1, and yeah, every now and again you see something kind of sticks out. Distance fights are generally quite a good one, I find too, because I think fights go to points more often than advertised, because obviously TV, like you're going to want it. You're going to want to advertise it as being a war and Hagler Hearns and everything like that. And in reality, most fights aren't. And AJ Parker, for example, he'd stopped everyone up until that point. But I remember just looking at Parker and thinking, he's a pretty solid unit. Depends on really how he approaches this, but this can easily go the distance. And same with Joshua Ruiz. I was always convinced that was going to be a scrappy points win. It wasn't scrappy in the end. Like, he boxed really well, but I was pretty convinced that that was just a win at all cost job. So I thought that was probably going to be a relatively dull. If he won, it was going to be a relatively dull points win. Yeah, it's interesting to read between the lines of boxing. I'd say I'm up. You tend to forget about your losses, don't you?
You obviously have your own podcast with Matthew Macklin. So how did that come about? How did you meet Matthew, and how did you have the conversation? Like, hey, let's start our own podcast.
Well, it's just through Sky that really, because we work together for Sky and have done since about 2013 probably. And I mean, I've been kind of full-time there for the last 4 years. And so a year and a half ago, or maybe about 2 years ago now, he started to kind of talk about it a little bit and said, people suggested to me that I should do one. I think Lou DeBella and had said to him, "Oh, you should do a podcast. You've had a really interesting kind of varied career." And he just asked me, we've always gotten really well. And he just said, "Well, why don't we do it? Because we do a lot of our commentary together." And I just said, yeah, because the thing with him is that he's really easy to do that kind of thing with. He's very well connected. So there's not really, I mean, with some people it might take a bit of time, but I don't think there's anyone we couldn't get. But with us, it's kind of more about the fun of it, to be honest. It's picking out those characters often where people might not really know who they are, but they've just got amazing stories and they're totally happy to tell them. That's the key, really, because some people can, not many, but some people can go a little bit kind of media savvy or corporate on you, and that's really not what you want. I mean, it generally doesn't happen in boxing. We did a great one with Callis Howland where, you could say anything, and he's one of the biggest promoters in the world. I mean, we haven't had any yet, strangely, because it's kind of quite a lot of the people who it would be sort of easiest for us to get, we haven't actually got, because you're always kind of on fight week. We're doing it with, like you lads doing it at the minute, but you're kind of prowling around and thinking who's around, who'd be good, and you see something a little bit, see someone a bit unexpected, and you think, oh yeah, they'd be good. So you end up going for them rather than Andre Ward, say, because you know that Andre Ward is going to be harder to get because he's much busier, and it probably have like an agent and stuff, and they won't ask you for money or anything. It will just be, there are some people involved in industries whose job seems to be to make things more complicated than they need to be. We avoid people who've got them.
That's true. You've done some great episodes. Steve Wood was a recent one. Those ones you do with John Pegg are amazing.
Yeah, John Pegg's great. John Pegg's a perfect example of what I was talking about, because he's been around boxing forever and he's got loads of great stories. One we keep meaning to do that we haven't done yet, there's a guy called Mike Goodall over in the UK who basically has got a company that puts up pretty much every ring that goes up for pro boxing. And he used to be an MC. He's been around boxing for like 40, 50 years. He's got a million stories. And again, just not afraid to tell them. So we keep meaning to track him down. But yeah, I mean, the Zoom thing's been interesting because what we do with them normally is when we meet up for fight weeks, which is like once every 2 or 3 weeks, or on average probably, we'll knock out 2 or 3 episodes depending on who's around. And we don't do that much current affairs, so they can kind of, doesn't really matter when we play them. But now obviously we're doing them on Zoom, and it means you can get people you wouldn't normally be able to get. So we did one with Nate Campbell a few weeks ago, who I know from doing IE stuff with, and he's brilliant. Like he's I had such an interesting time. We went to Uzbekistan and Venezuela with him for other tournaments, and it's just like, if somebody had told me a few years ago that I'd be spending a week in Tashkent and a week in Caracas with Nate Campbell, it's just like, just start laughing, wouldn't you? Just think, I can't envision any circumstances under which that's going to happen. But he's great. Like, he's really good. He's really interesting and really good fun. And we wouldn't be able to get him normally doing it the way we were doing it before. I'm not brilliant with technology, to be honest. So it took me a little bit of time to kind of to figure a few things out when it went away from recording it in person, but we've got somebody who helps us with that. So it's just good fun, isn't it? Podcasts. It's just, you've got to do it for the fun of it. I know, most of the people I know in boxing who do it, I just do it for the fun of it. But, some people I know are forever talking, you do it in other sports, forever talking about numbers and views and all the rest of it. And you just think, it's not really why we do it.
Because we kind of did a similar thing. We we get like cut men, commentators, TV personalities, doctors, like every sort of role in and around boxing, just to try and get their view and their story. So we tend to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page as you lads with it in that case, and that's, I do think that's more interesting. I just do. You get, you get a cutsman on. You get some of the ones that we've done that have done. The biggest numbers actually have been some of our Sky colleagues, because for us, we just see them all the time. But most people don't really hear from them that often. We did one with Anna Warhouse, who presents Sky Boxing, and she doesn't not give interviews. Like, she's really nice and friendly, but she's just not really that interested. She's there to do that job, and she does that job, does it really, really well. And she's just not bothered about, doing other stuff. But she'll do it for us because we're her friends. But you just forget, you just think, it must be just the bigger the name fighter is, the more people are going to be interested. And it's sometimes it's not, it's not the case. Bob Arum he's a massive name. Obviously, we would love to get him, and Matt knows him well, so we'd be hopeful of getting someone like him. I'd love to get Egis Klimas on. I just think really interesting stories. Whether he'd be able to tell you them all or not, I don't know. But I just think he'd have a hell of a good, few good stories to tell. But there's loads of them, aren't there? They're everywhere you look. Every fight week you're around, you can pick out a few people and just think, that'd be. This time last year when Dillian Whyte boxed Oscar Rivas, we're doing our normal thing, go to the press conference, and we're kind of scouting around thinking, who should we get? And then we saw Russ Amber, and we forgot that he was going to be there. And we thought, perfect. He's a great example. People in boxing know him, and he loves a chat, and he's done loads of stuff. And he wraps Loma's hands, which is interesting in itself. Most people don't really understand how that's. He himself doesn't really understand how that now is in itself a job. It was interesting just to talk to him about that. But yeah, there are loads, aren't there? If you do officials, do you have to get permission? Because if we did Marcus McDonald, who's one of our referees and judges, we had to get permission from the British Boxing Board of Control. No,
we did Jack Reese at the start of the COVID, and I just hit Jack Reese up, and he came on, and Ray Corona, a local referee from around here, he came on, and nothing from the state of California.
Yeah, Ray Corona is supposed to be I think he's assigned to the Tyson Roy Jones fight out here. Say that again. I'm sorry.
What do you think of that? What do you think of that Tyson Jones thing?
I'm not really against it in a sense. Like if the commission's going to be as strict as they're saying they are, as Andy Foster, the executive officer of the California Commission, is saying. But I don't think people and fans should expect, a 1995 Mike Tyson or, early 2000s Roy Jones. I think a lot of people are obviously going to watch and buy the pay-per-view, but you shouldn't realistically go in expecting that you're going to see an actual fight or, a prime Mike Tyson. I think that's just premature to think about.
Yeah, I'm the same. I don't really mind it, just so long as they're sensible about it. They would never get licensed here by the Board of Control. That wouldn't mean that you couldn't do it. Nigel Benn looked like he was going to do it, and then they didn't do it in the end because the ticket sales just weren't anywhere near where they thought they would be. And I think he felt a little bit wounded by that maybe. But I think that with Tyson and Roy Jones, people are going to want to watch that. But if anybody turns up to watch that or buys that thinking that they're actually going to see a proper fight, then they kind of deserve to have their money taken off them, to be honest. But I guess you have to be careful with those kinds of things. I wasn't a fan of the YouTube fights. I'm kind of hoping we've seen the end of them. I really wish the California State Athletic Commission hadn't licensed them as pros. I don't mind them fighting if they want to do white collar with head guards and that kind of thing. That's fine. But to license them as professionals, I think just brings a bit of danger into it, which is unnecessary because anyone can hurt anyone with those small gloves on. And they were just nowhere near the required standard to be in a professional ring. I didn't cover that first fight. I didn't go to it, but I covered the second one between the other Paul brother and a lad from London, Anderson Gibb. And it was just absolutely terrible. No way to say it, is it? And the thing is, when you're sitting there sort of commentating on it, you feel a bit, because I genuinely do have respect for anybody who's willing to get in there and give it a crack, particularly on that kind of stage, because you've got a lot of eyeballs on you. You're really opening yourself up to potential humiliation there, and that's what fighters fear more than anything, isn't it? And And so fair credit to you for doing all of that. But that's why they just should not have been allowed on that license as pros and shouldn't have been allowed on that platform, because you're watching it and you're just thinking, I mean, what is this? That fight. What is this?
Right.
And I felt a bit bad. I felt a bit bad for the English lad, actually, because I mean it was horrendous.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think, especially kind of going back to Tyson, Roy Jones, especially because we are in Southern California, like, the greater Los Angeles area. Obviously, you have the Hollywood studios and entertainment capital. You know how everybody looks at Hollywood and Los Angeles like that. I mean, like, we've had Andy Foster, the executive officer of the California Commission, on 2 or 3 times on here. He's very detailed about his answers when we ask questions and stuff. And we know he's a sharp guy, but like sometimes I think I've talked to Mike about this. Like sometimes I think, like, do they take into account that especially Hollywood and LA is kind of like an entertainment thing? So these YouTubers, when this crosses their desk for them to sanction the fight, do they think about the entertainment aspect? Like, oh, okay, well, do they kind of maybe bend the rules a little bit just in case, because it's a Hollywood attraction or something like that? Does California make a difference? Like if this was a fight that it was trying to be staged in, Oklahoma or something,
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, commissions can be. You can always find somewhere that'll put on the fight, can't you? Because I mean, I remember before Christmas with Chavez against Jacobs. Chavez kept missing tests in Nevada, and then they were told they couldn't fight in Nevada. And then I think, according to the Ali Act, the federal act, that means or the Union of Boxing Commissions or something. That means that you then can't have it anywhere. But actually, it says that you can, and he just took it to Memphis, I think, in the end, and then
Phoenix. Yeah,
Phoenix. That was it. Yeah, Arizona. They just said, fine, come on down. And it's going to make them some money, and that is just what happens. And yeah, you're probably right. I mean, to single out California is probably a bit unfair, because that made a lot of money. And it's fine for me to sit here and say, oh, but he could have hurt, but it didn't happen, did it? They could turn around at the end of it and say, yes, that was a valid concern. Your concern was noted, but it didn't happen. And I think. Yeah, I mean, I was well aware that stuff was not for me. It wasn't aimed at me. I wasn't the audience or the target market for that. But I don't know. I've had the whole thing just slightly bizarre, to be honest. I know boxing's always attractive, people from all walks of life and from all industries, and there's an enormous amount of respect for fighters, and you see people wanting to get involved when you really wonder why. But for that one, it was, I don't know. That could be, I'm not sure there'll be too many more of them now, to be honest, anyway.
Right. Kind of going to this past weekend, obviously, this past Friday, the 14th of August, there was another edition of Matchroom Fight Camp in Essex on DAZN. I believe it was Sky Sports as well.
Yeah.
Headlined by Felix Cash, who got the 5th round TKO over Jason Wellborn for the Commonwealth Middleweight Championship. That entire card from Friday, the Matchroom Fight Camp, that latest edition or the Friday edition, what'd you think about that card, Andy?
Yeah, it was good. It turned out well. The main event did kind of go how I thought it would, so it wasn't as good as we hoped it might be. But when I kind of looked into it more deeply, I know both of them really well. I've covered them both a lot. And Matt, who was doing the commentary with Macklin, he knows Jason Wellborn. They're not like really friends or anything, but they're from the same part of the country, and he boxed him as well. And the question with it was, he's 34. He's just had a kid. He's definitely thinking about life after boxing, because he's got quite a thriving business. And I heard him talking about that kind of stuff, and I thought, that's a bit of a problem, because it kind of suggests that if you find yourself in a position where you really have to bite down and tough it out, if boxing's not really the most important thing in your life anymore, then you're probably not going to do it. And that's what happened. Like, Felix is younger and fresher and started putting it on him, and I think he kind of tried to, but either you really want to or you don't. And I don't really have a problem with it. I think sometimes people, when they see somebody pull up the drawbridge maybe a bit too quickly for their liking, they can get a bit upset. But for me, I just particularly, everybody gets to that stage where they, you know, that Rocky line where they get civilized, don't they? And then boxing is not, it's not the be all and end all anymore. And what I saw in there really was someone who got to that point and he was in pain and he's been clubbed around by like a 27-year-old who's in unbelievable shape. And he just thought, you know what, I just don't want to do this anymore. And I was kind of okay with it. The rest of the card, there's a really good fight between Eric Donovan and Zelfa Barrett. Me and Matt had Donovan and Kenny Egan, his trainer, on our podcast the Sunday before. And I really like those kind of matchups because you've got somebody who was a top-level international amateur. Time has passed since then, obviously, and that was one of the questions, but a top-level international amateur against someone who was very much bred for pro boxing. And that's what Barrett's always been. Like, he had an amateur career, rather, fairly brief, deliberately so. They were never going to stick around there too long. But he'd been sparring pro since he was 15, 16. His uncle Pat was a very good pro. So he was, like I say, bred for pro boxing. And I think that's, I don't know what it's like in America, but in UK, that is almost becoming a rarer thing these days than it used to be, because everybody loses their mind over great amateurs turning pro and how quickly they can move and how quickly they can fight for titles and what a great preparation of school in professional boxing, being a top amateur is. And that's all true, but it's not the only way to prepare for being a professional. If you do what Zelfa's done and what people have done in decades gone by, you spar from a young age against professionals, you grow up in a professional gym, you have a load of learning fights that you're not going to get beaten in, and that's fine because you're just learning your trade. Then you have a step up, and he lost his first big step up, but he learned a lot. And now he just looks like the real thing. Like Donovan had won almost every round, but he stayed calm and patient, and in the end he took him out. And that is professional boxing, isn't it? Like the card, if you knock someone out, it doesn't matter what it says on the cards. That's say Barrett KO8. That's it. End of story. There's no asterisk. And people often, you know, it's but he was winning until he got knocked out. But he got knocked out. So I love that fight. Donovan and Kenny Egan are ace as well. You know, it'd be great to get on for you boys. You'd have a great time with them. The fight between Rachel Ball and Shannon Courtney, close. We thought close. No argument with the referee giving it to Ball. I think Matt had it to Courtney by a point. Again, you know, we'll probably see a rematch of that one, I reckon. Kieran Conway, I enjoyed that one against Nav Mansouri. Towards the end, this sounds like sort of faintly sadistic, but you know, coming back after a long while away, he'd been boxing in Spain, but so basically he was an English champion. Then he was supposed to challenge for the British title a couple of times, didn't because of injury, moved to Spain, met his partner there, has had a kid, had some fights out there, got the rough end of the stick with a couple of decisions from what I can tell. But wanted to, you know, was looking at the super welterweight scene back home and thinking how interesting it was and wanted to get back in. And so got this fight. Anyway, Kieran Conway's a young guy, fresh guy, very, very fit. But I just loved the way that Mansouri hung in there. He did really well until halfway through. And then he took a beating in the 7th round. And at that point, again, I'm thinking, he's not really old now. He's like 31. But again, I'm thinking, if you just want to sit down now, that is fine. Like, I will not blame you if you do that. And he didn't. He just hung in there and hung in there and hung in there. And I thought that was, you know, I've got so much admiration for that because, like I say, none of us would have blamed him if he just thought, you know what, I think I've had enough. But it just shows that he's still got some desire left. And top of the show, we had John Doherty, John Dock, who's a 22-year-old Scottish guy. Good amateur, actually, he was, but turned pro young rather than stick around for Tokyo. He's a traveller, and they get taught to box really young, generally when they're about 4 or 5. So he's been doing that a long time. Anthony Fox's opponent, really good game fighter, good capable fighter. But Doherty looks like he could be an interesting one because he can really crack, and he just absolutely loves it. Like, he lives and breathes it. There's nothing he wants to do. Any time of day where he's not boxing, to him is just time wasted. You know, he's one of them. And well, you'll be seeing more of him definitely. Yeah, it was a good night. It was a good night.
Andy, you kind of touched on what you saw from Jason Wellborn before the fight. You now have my WhatsApp. I'm open to insider trading. So, anytime you're covering an event and you can't place bets yourself, I'm always welcome to just send me a little text.
I didn't really look at the odds for that one. I did get sucked in the week before with Fabio Wardley against Simon Vallily, because Vallily was like 8-1 or something like that. And I did think Wardley would probably win, but Vallily was a really good amateur and had definite ability, but it just never really translated it to the pros. So I threw some money away on that one, and most of us did because the price was just so big. But I don't even really know what the odds were with Wellborn. I think he was like 3 or 4-1. If you backed Felix, you'd have needed to have stuck a lot on him to have made anything really. I was kind of hoping I was going to be wrong, and that Wellborn might, just think just one more for the road. Like, this is going to be the last time I do this. I'll just bite down this one more time. But then again, that's a really easy thing to say when you're the one who's actually got to do it. I remember Macklin telling me that he retired after his fight against Brian Rose, and he said he just sat down after 4 rounds or 5 rounds and just thought, I can't do this anymore. It just really isn't there. I'll just dog this out and get the win, and then I'm done. Because that's just how he is. And he was in a fight that he was expected to win, whereas Jason was up against it. But I just can't even imagine that. I can't imagine just sitting on the stool, just thinking, oh, God, I really don't want to be here anymore. I know how I find a way out of that problem. And he wouldn't be going out there and toughing it out for another 5 rounds, definitely.
Then moving on to Saturday, the 15th of August, from your call on ESPN Plus, Carl Frampton gets the 7th round TKO over Darren Trainer. What'd you think about that entire card, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy it because Frampton did what he needed to do, because he just needs to get the win to set up that fight with Jamel Herring, assuming that Herring beats Jonathan Oquendo. And Darren Trainer came in late on. He's normally a super lightweight, so he was kind of coming down and Frampton was coming up. And I thought Darren Trainer did really well. Like, he stayed nice and tight and compact and kept his boxing together. He's a national champion level over here. He's been Scottish champion at 3 different weights. Difficult to kind of equate that to an American title level, because state titles can vary in standard quite a lot. But he's decent anyway. And I wasn't expecting him to last as long as he did, to be honest. But he was able to take Frampton's power, and he did try and get his own stuff done. And Frampton, I think, realised after 2 or 3 rounds, okay, this might be. We just need to box here and let business kind of take care of itself. And that's what happened in the end. Good to see Michael Conlon. Michael Conlon was in with Sofiane Takoucht, who Josh Warrington cut down in a couple of rounds in the WBA featherweight title defence last October, which was unfortunate for Conlon in a way, because people would look at that and just think, oh, right, well, you should do the same or something near that. But that was a bit of an anomaly for Takoucht. He's lost 3 other fights and always over the distance against some decent guys as well. So the fact that Michael couldn't get him stopped at that point in the fight was completely fine. He got a couple of points taken away for body shots, for low blows, which upset the rhythm a bit. But I thought he boxed well, and I thought that the stoppage was impressive. I didn't see it coming, and then he just hurt him and jumped on him and finished him. And I thought that was good, because people needed to see a bit of that from him. I think he's going to drop down to super bantamweight, and he's homing in on the WBO title, which Angelo Leo won, I think, a couple of weeks ago, didn't he? And there's a great fight for him at super bantamweight too, if he can get a title, because Akhmadaliev, Yurijan Akhmadaliev, who's got the WBA and IBF, they boxed in the 2015 World Amateur Championship final when Conlon won gold. And it was a good fight. Akhmadaliev put him down with a straight... I was there. Akhmadaliev put him down with a straight right hand with about 10 seconds to go. But Conlon had kind of already won the fight by then. And the fight between Archie Sharp and Jeff Afori, I thought Sharp was lucky. Like, he's at 4 with the WBO at super featherweight. He's undefeated. Frank Warren's kind of manoeuvring him up the rankings, which he's extremely good at doing. But that fight showed, and they would already have known that he's a way off, that kind of any kind of world title challenge. Afori I know quite well, because he captained the club that my wife used to box at for a bit, and it's just an interesting story. Like, he boxed in the Golden Contract, the MTK tournament we cover on Sky earlier in the season. Very short notice, got the call on the morning of the weigh-in, came in, stripped off, jumped on the scales, got dressed, went downstairs to move his car because he left it on the double yellow line. It was one of those kind of scenarios for him. And I thought he did really well. And I thought I didn't actually score it round by round, so I can't really comment according to my own rules. But Sharp was lucky, I thought, to get the win there. I thought he was lucky. It's a really lacklustre performance. Troy Williamson got a win against Harry Scarf. That was a good fight as well. I mean, I wasn't scoring that, but that looked pretty close to me. I've seen Harry Scarf a couple of times. Troy was a good amateur with GB. Boxed in the World Series boxing finals against Cuba in 2016. Got stopped by Arlen Lopez, but no shame in that. And we had Paddy Donovan right up at the top of the show, trained by Andy Lee. He's not a Frank Warren fighter. He's a top-ranked fighter. And he got an early stoppage. And another kid on there who we didn't see on TV, which was a shame actually, called Dennis McCann, who's a bantamweight. He's a traveller like Doherty. Paddy Donovan is too, actually. There's more and more of them coming into pro boxing now, following Fury and Saunders and Andy Lee and Isaiah Burt and other fighters. And they've got this amazing schooling because they taught to box from so young. And generally they win a shitload of amateur titles when they're schoolboys and youths, and then a lot of them give up, but more of them now are staying. And Dennis McCann, Dennis the Menace, looks great. Like, he's a kind of throwback fighter, slick back hair. If you saw a picture of him on a gym wall, he could be from the 50s or 60s. He's got a really nice style to him. And he stopped a lad who's been stopped once in 81 fights, who's incredibly reliable, and it's been in with some really good fighters too. So, yeah, I think it would have been good to see McCann on TV, but these things don't always work out. He was the float, and I think they thought that they would need him because they were holding Frampton back to make sure he was on after the Champions League finished. Both those fights basically went the distance, and he had to wait till practically midnight before he got in the ring. But when you're a young fighter, that's how it goes, isn't it? Sometimes
they actually showed his fight on ESPN over here, ESPN Plus.
Oh yeah, we nearly did. I was working for TalkSport last night, so doing radio. Yeah, we nearly did it as well. We didn't in the end, which was a shame because I was saying, we should do this because it's not going to be on BT. It'd be a good little thing to be able to say to the promoter, listen, we did that fight. We're all in here. So yeah, what did you think?
Oh, he's a great prospect. I've loved him since he first hit the scene. I kind of feel sorry for him because everyone keeps saying he's going to be the next, Prince Nazim. But if he keeps, he talks well, he looks good. I think he's kind of like a promoter's dream because he goes in there as soon as he hurts him, he just takes him out of there. So fingers crossed, he should be another British world champion.
Yeah, hopefully. And he's so young too. He can do bantamweight at the moment. How long for, who knows really, but he can definitely do it. He's dedicated. He got engaged, I think, earlier on during lockdown.
I think he got married.
Yeah, no, he got married. Yeah, you're right. He got married. Yeah, he's got a good trainer, Alan Smith, who trains his fighters down in southeast London. So, and there's some good fighters around that kind of weight, particularly at super bantamweight as well, the one above for him to. I think matching him will probably be the difficult thing. That's generally a problem when you get someone with that kind of ability. Brett Fido, who he beat last night, he's boxed everybody between super flyweight, flyweight really, and kind of featherweight because there's not that many guys, away corner guys around those lower weights. So convincing someone who's above McCann in the pecking order to fight him will be really difficult. It'll be really difficult. You'll have to pay them well, or for them to be kind of towards the end of their career and fancy being a little bit of a stalking horse. No one really fancies that, but if you show someone enough money to do it, they'll probably do it because otherwise matching him's not going to be. It's the same with Paddy Donovan. Matching him's going to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's just the fact of Tyson Fury and Billy Joe Saunders have made a lot of money, being good professionals, world champions, that's made the traveling community see it as an actual career? Because obviously we've known, being British, that they dominate the amateur scene, but then they don't always turn pro. They go to work instead. Yeah,
well, that's it. I'm sort of mildly obsessed with it, actually, the boxing culture in the travelling community. So I spoke to Billy Joe Saunders' dad about it when I saw him at a press conference once. We got Peter Fury on, me and Matt on the podcast, and spoke to him about it. And yeah, he's pretty much what you just said. Basically, they're under pressure to go out and work young. I think Peter was basically out of school and working by the time he was like 12 or 13 to make money. They get married young generally, and that brings more responsibility. But things have changed as the generations pass, basically. Like Peter was saying, that the way he came up compared to the way that Huey has, his son, are just totally different, And I know older generations generally tend to say that younger ones have it easier. He wasn't complaining. He was saying it's a good thing, but it is different now. And yeah, they see like Andy Lee would have been the first one really to go to Athens in 2004. Before that, like you say, they learn to box at 4 or 5 years old, and they're taught well too. That's another key part of it. So by the time you get to schoolboy titles, when you're 11, 12, 13, some of them have been boxing for 7 or 8 years, and they're up against people who've been boxing for 2 maybe. So they clean up in the schoolboy level and at youth level. And then a lot of the time they drift away because they need to go and find work. But and their dad will be getting them out of the house. Their family will be getting them out of the house and just saying, listen, never mind messing around with that. You need to be earning. Whereas now it's seen as more of a career that you could go to the Olympics, because Billy Joe went to the Olympics in 2008. And since then, there's more and more of them coming into the sport all the time. Felix Cash is another one, actually. He's another traveller. And there are a lot of them out there, and they don't keep it to themselves. They're not trying to hide it, but you would need to know. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. Sometimes you can tell when you hear a post-fight interview, because they'll have an Irish accent, basically, but then you'll see where they're from, and they're not actually from Ireland, or they don't live there. That's not where they're. That's always a bit of a giveaway. But yeah, there's just loads of them coming through now, and they are a handful, because technically they are good. And I just think a big advantage when you've been boxing for a really long time is you just feel a lot more at home in the ring. So you look at Fury and Joshua, for example. Joshua started boxing when he was 18. I think they're roughly the same age, those two. I think Fury might be a bit older, but I don't think there's a lot in it. Joshua started boxing when he was 18, so he's been boxing for 11, 12 years now. Fury, he would have started when he was 4 or 5. Like, he's been boxing for about 25 years. And it makes a difference, because Fury is just the ultimately relaxed fighter in the ring. He can look a little bit jittery sometimes when somebody steps on him, but it's just that's what it's about for me. They just look so comfortable in there. Saunders is exactly the same. They're the kinds of fighters who really you would struggle to ever bet against with total confidence against anyone. I mean, I was pretty amazed when Fury did what he did to Wilder the second time around, but sort of slightly irritated with myself for being surprised, because although he's never really done anything like that before, if he tells you that he's going to box a different style, you definitely know that he can. I just didn't think he would, because it pretty much worked the first time. I thought he'd just stick with doing that, but he didn't, did he? But yeah, for fighters from travelling backgrounds, it's fascinating stuff, really. I don't know if you really have any equivalent in the USA.
No, not like that. Really. No.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm hoping that Tyson Fury, because he now manages fighters like Isaac Lowe and Billy Joe Saunders has a few under him, that he'll take that talent and nurture it. Yeah,
I think so. Jose Burton's another one. He's a cousin of Tyson's, and there's more and more coming through all the time. Charles Franca, he's another young fighter who's turned pro recently. Opie Price, who's trained by Dave Caldwell, he's from the same background. It's more and more common now, because, like you said, they see it as a career. They see it as something they can do and something they can make money from, and bring prestige to a community that often gets a lot of unfair criticism. And that's a great thing about boxing. You just meet people from all sorts of different backgrounds, And it was great talking to Peter Fury about it, and him just describing what it was like when he was a kid. And the kinds of things that you were expected to be able to do and to handle, and the amount of responsibility that was heaped on you young. And so I think it probably is quite a good thing that it's not quite the way that it used to be. But it's just, yeah. I mean, in other parts of the world, if you grow up in in Brazil, you'll have a ball at your feet where by the time you can stand up, and if you're a traveller, you'll be getting your hands taped. That's how it goes.
And then also on Saturday from Tulsa, Oklahoma on DAZN, we have a new undisputed welterweight world champion in Jessica McCaskill. Actually got the majority decision, 10-round decision over Cecilia Braekhus, who suffers the first loss of her career at 38 years old. I know we talked just before going on air, Andy, that you haven't been able to catch this fight or kind of read upon it, but like Mike was saying, like it was a pretty, back and forth fight. It could have probably went the other way for Braekhus, and she could have retained. Like Mike was saying, kind of she was the champion. When they were about to read the scorecards, I did believe that she would have edged it just because she was the champion, and there is that notion, you have to take it from the champion. But obviously that did not happen. And Jessica McCaskill is now the undisputed female welterweight world champion. And obviously there should be a showdown in the future with the rematch between Katie Taylor and Delphine Persoon this upcoming next week. Obviously, what'd you think about that? The new champion in that division in Jessica McCaskill, Andy?
I was a bit surprised when I woke up this morning and saw the result. I saw Braekhus live for the only time in Monaco, and I thought she looked like she's still got plenty left. And all the chat was, how low could Eddie and Team Taylor convince her to come down so that they could box her for all the titles at welterweight? Braekhus said to me that she would probably do 143, which is quite a long way for Taylor to step up, because Taylor is a stone cold lightweight. You can see that when she boxed Christina Linodatu. She's not a super lightweight. She's never in a million years is she a welterweight. But I think the one thing that can that's not such a big deal in women's boxing at the moment, is it? Because there isn't as much strength in depth. Because McCaskill's a lightweight too. She's not even really a super lightweight. She's the same as Taylor. She's not a welterweight either. So that's why I was surprised that she got the win. But I do really like her, because I remember when she came over to London to box Katie, I got hold of her on the phone before she arrived, and just had a chat with her and a quick chat with Rick Ramos, and you get a sense of what they've done, and it's just really impressive, because most of the big names in women's boxing have broken through courtesy of building a name from the Olympic Games. So Caressa Shields, Katie Taylor, Nicola Adams over here as well. And she hasn't. Like, she had to graft to get noticed in Chicago and to get signed by Warriors. She really had to put the time in. I think as someone who's done a similar thing over here is Hannah Rankin. I know Hannah quite well, and she's had to really, really just work so hard to build that profile and to get people to take her seriously. And I think it's important that people who have come through that route do well, because otherwise you're just going to get the idea for, young women maybe thinking about boxing, about professional boxing. They might just get the idea, well, if I haven't been to the Olympics, then no promoter's interested. I may as well not bother. So it's good when people like McCaskill have done what she's done. Interesting one for us is that she's still got 2 belts at super lightweight, hasn't she?
Yeah.
Chantel Cameron's mandatory for the WBC at super lightweight and at lightweight. So that's another fighter to kind of throw into that mix. But I guess the idea would be, that Katie Taylor beats Persoon, which I think she probably will. And then they get that fight with McCaskill. But the interesting thing about that will be is that throughout the whole of Taylor's career so far, she's been calling the tune, to the point where some of her opponents have not been that happy about it. I think at times they felt a little bit disrespected. Linodatu definitely did, because it was billed as Taylor Linodatu, even though Linodatu was a champion. Got no rematch clause, even though she was giving Taylor a voluntary. And she just got railroaded, really, because Taylor's Taylor and Matchroom are just going to call as many of the shots as they possibly can. But if they get that fight with McCaskill, it'll be for all those belts at welterweight, and she'll be the challenger. So it'll be interesting to see kind of like how hardball, Rick Ramos and Team McCaskill play it, because I would give McCaskill a decent chance in a rematch against Taylor. I don't think she's got that many more left in her, to be honest. She trains ferociously hard, probably too hard. That would be a slight concern for me going into the rematch against Bassoon. She's been in Connecticut for 6 or 7 months, and I think it's very difficult to get her to take a day off. So I think she would have just been training all that time. I think it's been basically impossible for Ross Endermaid to get her to relax. It's just not how she is. So hopefully he has been able to do it, but yeah, I don't think she's got loads of fights left in her. But yeah, just great credit to McCaskill, really. Just the way she's managed to engineer it, the way she's come through her career. Like I said, I think it's important that people like her do well.
Mm. I wonder if Eddie's kind of upset because from the time that Katie Taylor turned pro, it was always Cecilia Braekhus against Katie Taylor. Was they were the way it was going. They were just going to meet eventually, and we've been talking about it for years. And obviously, she's already fought Jessica McCaskill. So I bet Eddie was kind of scratching his head.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that was his plan. That was his plan. It was a good competitive fight because we all, we've seen McCaskill in the UK and we know that she is good, but I didn't think she'd beat Braekhus. I really didn't see that coming because Braekhus, she's not exactly a big welterweight either, but she is a welterweight, whereas McCaskill's not. And I did think she'd win. And I do feel for her too because she's kind of hanging out, waiting for that Taylor fight to try and make as much money as she possibly can before she retires Braekhus. And who knows what she's made from the 20-plus defences, but
probably not a lot.
Be that much because there haven't been the opponents out there to catch the imagination. And if she could have got a fight with Taylor, then that could have just really sweetened the deal for her towards the end of the career, and she deserved it after everything that she's done. And it's not going to happen. I mean, I don't know. Would she retire now? Maybe. I guess it's possible, but it's a bit of a damp squib for her, definitely.
And then the co-main event, which is probably the fight that's been getting the most scrutiny as of this past weekend. Israel Madrimov gets a unanimous decision win over Eric Walker. But earlier in that fight, we're not sure if you were able to maybe watch a replay of that incident. Madrimov had done some type of leaping left overhand punch that he really knocked the crap out of Eric Walker with. But then Madrimov looks like he kind of goes into like some type of, lowered stance and with his left shoulder goes into Eric Walker's midsection, which looks to push him back. But, obviously there's a lot of scrutiny in there in terms of people on boxing Twitter, especially, or just even other, prestigious reporters and stuff saying the referee should have stopped that fight because a lot of people felt that Eric Walker might have been concussed or he would have been knocked out by that punch. If you had a chance to review that replay or that incident and kind of read up details about it, what'd you think about it, Andy?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in any great detail, but I did watch it a couple of times on my phone earlier today. And the thing about those kinds of incidents is that what did the referee rule? Did he rule a knockdown?
He did not.
He said that he kind of went to the side of the ring and told the officials on the outside that the punch was fine, but he felt that when his momentum took him forward, it was the momentum that pushed Walker to the floor. So he said that if Walker couldn't continue, they were just going to go to the scorecards. He was kind of calling it like an accidental foul, I guess.
Foul, basically. Okay, yeah. That's interesting. So did he count then? And would he have been? Would have Madrimov have got the credit for the knockdown, as in the 10-8 win in the round?
I don't think so, because I think he was saying that the only reason we knew for a fact that he was going to go to the floor was due to the push. So I think he would have just gone straight to the scorecards, and I'm not too sure whether it would have been a 10-8.
I mean, it's a difficult situation, that, because, my kind of take on it is that if the punch starts the downward momentum, but then again, if you land a solid punch and somebody's on their way down and then they trip over your lead leg and go down, sometimes referees won't give that. But that for me is definitely a knockdown. This was different, wasn't it? Because he did, yeah. He flew in from miles out, landed, and then just went straight into him. So it is a difficult situation for the referee. And I mean, what you can always do in that scenario as well is, if you're the stricken fighter, if you want to, you can just see if you can get a DQ there. We've seen fighters do that before. But by the look of it, he didn't do that. And I mean, it's just a messy situation. If he thinks that a punch has caused the knockdown, then he has to administer the count, really. But then if he feels that it's a follow through that has caused the injury, I think he probably did the right thing in that case, because the safety of the fighter's got to be paramount. I mean, it was an unusual kind of move from Madrimov. I'm not quite sure what that was about. I haven't really seen that from him before.
Well, earlier in that fight, the reason why I don't think it was an accident. Madrimov did a couple rounds earlier. It looks like they were both kind of low on stamina. They were both pretty tired, and even the DAZN commentators were actually acknowledging that. And Madrimov did, land, just like maybe like a straight jab on Walker earlier, but then tackled him to the floor. And sometimes when fighters do that, it kind of gives you those extra couple seconds to catch your breath. So some people thought that Madrimov tackled him to the floor a couple rounds earlier because he needed to catch his breath, and it gives him that extra time for them to get up and the referee to kind of keep them apart. And then he did get deducted later on in the fight for some low blows that he was hitting Walker with throughout the fight. So that whole shoulder thing, I personally feel that he knew what he was doing, but it's possible that Walker could have been knocked out or knocked down from that punch already, and he didn't. And Madrimov didn't need to do the whole shoulder tackle thing. But kind of looking at the replay from that incident, it felt to me that Walker's, when he got hit with that left hand, he obviously felt it, and it was possible that he could have went down. But if you look at his body weight was still kind of hunched forward, so it's possible he could have still maintained his balance, but it's also possible that he could have went down and been knocked out or knocked down. I think it was just a tough, like you said, it's kind of a messy situation.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think really the only thing you could do there is you would probably just have to ignore the knockdown and just act on the follow-up event, if you like, which has caused him to be unable to continue, because you just don't know whether the punch would have done that or not, and that's really all you could do, and you would rule it an accidental foul. And yeah, like you said, you go to the cards. It sounds like a pretty odd performance from him, though. I mean, I saw him a lot in the amateurs, Madrimov, or quite a lot the last couple of years. Sort of 2017 World Championships, he was at those. And I remember seeing him when he was at 75 kilos. I remember just thinking, wow, this guy's massive. Like, how does he make it at that weight? Because Beksim and Melakuziev have been Uzbekistan's guy at 75, and he moved up to 81, and he didn't really look big enough for it. And I was kind of told that he'd been told he needed to move up because they were going to pick Madrimov at 75, and I thought, holy shit, like, I can't wait to see this guy, because Melakuzev's really good. And he was good to watch, and I sort of give a lad from Turkmenistan a terrible hiding, and the corner wouldn't stop it because it was Uzbekistan against Turkmenistan, and you don't do that. But the referee, a lad called Aziz Akilov, saved him in the end. Anyway, I mean, he's moved very quick, isn't he? He's one of these guys like Shakram Girsov, like Murajon Akhmadaliev, who is moving very, very fast. I mean, I just saw endless kind of footage of him running up mountain trails and walking on his hands and stuff like that up sheer cliffs during lockdown. So I just assume that, it's a bit of a surprise to hear that he was maybe gassing a bit, because he looked like he was never doing anything other than training. But I mean, it's when you see these guys who are moving that quick, they're not all Lomachenko, are they?
Mm-hmm.
With some of them, they move just possibly a bit too quick, because I think he's pretty much, is he now mandatory with the WBA?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, it was an eliminator.
Yeah, so he would get the winner of that fight between Jason Rosario and Jamel Charlo, wouldn't he?
Mm-hmm. Seems like it, yeah.
I wouldn't say that he would be ready for either of them yet. But
not after that performance.
No, I mean, they are just kind of obsessed with moving them as quick as they can. And I don't think you necessarily have to. Like Usyk, I mean, yeah, he won titles early too, but he wasn't boxing for world titles after 5-6 fights. But then Akhmadaliev was he won his two in the in his second fight, I think, against Danny Roman, who's a perfectly good world champion, not stellar, but worthy of the title, definitely. So you can see why they do it. I think he's with World of Boxing, isn't he? I think he's one of those guys. Over this week, actually, with Povetkin. It's always interesting seeing them around. They're the most Soviet-looking team I've ever seen. It's great. Like you see their gear, and oh God, I'd love to buy some. Russian tracksuits are amazing. Like when you used to see them at the amateurs, they're just they're always fun to see, those boys. Just because they're so stern, they're not fun at all. They might be behind away from the cameras.
Right.
But, it all looked a bit odd. It all looked a bit odd, that whole episode from Madrimov, really.
Right. And kind of rounding out that card, just to kind of touch on the results here. Shakram Gayasov gets a third-round KO over Winston Campos. Raymond Ford gets the unanimous decision over Eric Manriquez. Nikita Ababe gets the unanimous decision over Jarvis Williams. And then also, he was supposed to be on the card, but it was supposed to be his professional debut. Mark Castro tested positive for COVID-19. So his debut on the Matchroom DAZN card had to be scrapped. But the strange thing is, I think like this whole era that we're living in is that everything's becoming stranger and stranger. He goes home a couple days later and he tests negative. So, that was an unfortunate thing.
Yeah, I saw all of that. It's unfortunate for him. And I've seen Ray Ford a few times. I quite like him. The young fighters that Matchroom have signed, I think they're all quite promising without any of them looking supersonic. I'm a bit of a fan of Austin Williams, Ammo Williams. I think he looks a good fighter to me. I saw him over here with Regis Prograis doing some sparring, and so I've seen more of him than the others, I guess. And I thought he's looked pretty handy. Barbie's good to watch.
Yeah,
it's difficult to say. Those kind of three originals that he signed from Cops and Kids Gym in Brooklyn, wasn't it? Him and Cozy Solomon, who seems to have totally disappeared, and Reshat Marty. Him and Marty they love a tear up, so they're good to watch. But I have no idea how good they are, or how good they're going to turn out to be. How good's Castro, by the way? Because I keep an eye on the amateurs, but he came through the kind of junior and youth, didn't he? He didn't really box as a senior, I don't think. So I think that's why I didn't really know him. And of course, when somebody turns pro and they've won junior national titles, the spiel on them is of course going to be that they're the best thing ever and they're going to be amazing. But I've never seen him, so I've no idea. I mean, how good is he, do you think?
He's good. I saw him sparring a few pros. He was at Joel Diaz's gym and he was sparring with like Virgil Ortiz after he won some WBC national tournament out here in California. He does like the gyms in California. He's been Robert Garcia gym. He goes over and spars with Ryan Garcia over with the Canelo camp. So, he's got a good from the gyms. Everyone says he has a good reputation. We've had him on the podcast. He speaks well. I think he kind of understands the business. He's also understands the social media side of it. So I'm hoping that, me and Danny were kind of talking about the other week that, I hope that side of it doesn't distract him from the bread and butter of the actual boxing.
Right.
I think there's always a bit more of a danger of that in the USA, just because it's so much bigger. In the UK, I think it's easier to build up a local following and to sell tickets in your local area and to try and sell out your local arena. I think in America, I just don't know if those days. I think those days might have gone now. I mean, you look at Crawford in Nebraska, Wilder in Alabama, Gervonta Davis probably in Baltimore. I reckon could probably sell an arena out. You know better than me, but generally everybody looks to go global straight away, don't they now? And I do sort of understand it because it looks like you've got this amazing global social media reach. And Ryan Garcia's a good example. Like, everybody talks about, I mean, he's a good fighter as well. He gets a bit of grief because, people say, is he really a proper fighter? Is he an Instagram fighter? The usual bullshit. But, this idea that because you got 1.6 million Instagram followers, that makes you a big draw in terms of viewing figures or at the box office. as far as I'm concerned, there's no correlation between those two things. Mm-hmm. Following someone on Instagram or Twitter is the most casual thing you can do. It just involves clicking a button. There's no commitment involved there. For someone to come and watch you fight in America, and they'll keep them at home, obviously, but you've got to pay for a ticket. You've got to go to the venue. You might have to get on a train or a bus or book a flight. That's an altogether different thing. So I think the kind of social media reach thing is massively overrated. And it would be good to see people just work a little bit harder maybe at just building up that fan base. We were talking to Josh Warrington about it the other week, and it's hard work, but once you've got it, then of course promoters love you because they can take a show to your town and put you top of the bill. And if you can sell 1,500, 2,000 tickets and sell out a local, your York Hall's about that size, if you can do that, then, not many people can do that. And it's amazing how quickly people will turn their nose up and just think, 1,500, 2,000 tickets, that's not much of a following. And you think, all right, well, you do it then. How many young fighters are there who can do it? There's not. We've got Joe Laws in. I'm going to hesitate to say exactly where you're from because I don't want to insult you. But
no, that's right.
I might get it wrong because, there's a difference between, Geordies and Mackhams and Teesside and all the rest of it. But Joe Laws is a great example. Like, he's a 4-6 round fighter at the minute. But, when we go up there, he sells half of those tickets probably. It's probably him and Lewis Ritson who sell that place out. People think it's just Lewis Ritson. And it isn't. Like, Joe Laws, I reckon Joe Laws could probably sell 5,000 tickets if he really had to, which is madness. But that's why he's always getting on at Devin Haney, basically just saying, can you do that? No, you can't. And he's right. Devin Haney probably can't, which is crazy. But
it's mad in the US. Like, shows don't sell out. Like, we go to events all the time, and it's not like the UK where, like, if in the UK you stick on, look at Luke Campbell when he fought Lomachenko, sold out in one day. Like, over here, even the big fights, like, those people will still be walking up to the box office on fight night.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that. I don't know. I think maybe it is that. Maybe it's just that bit more tribal here because it's just a much smaller place and people get behind local fighters more. I think that's probably it. Like, you wouldn't want to go to Newcastle all the time or Liverpool all the time or Manchester all the time or Sheffield. But those four places, if you've got a good card, you're going to sell out. And you can go to each of them 2 or 3 times a season. Birmingham, you can go to a little bit of a smaller town if you've got somebody who in that area does particularly well. And then you're probably going to have the rest of them in London. And so many people who live here that, there's enough people interested that are going to want to go. And then you've got your bigger fights where your more casual audience or fancy it. Joshua fights, for example, they attract, in stadiums at least, a different crowd. And you'd be surprised at how kind of attractive fighters like Usyk and Lomachenko are to people, or how quickly people will buy into them who don't really know that much about them, because that sort of mystique of, I am very feel, and they don't really speak that much English. People go for that. They like it because it's a bit different. People still love that whole kind of Rocky IV cliche of East versus West, don't they? They still do now, like, even though it's such a long time ago. People were fascinated by them when they came over. I mean, selling tickets is, I think about the difference between people saying they're going to buy one and actually buying one and turning up. Again, that's another thing which is just light years apart. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare for young fighters when they're on ticket deals, but if you haven't been signed by a big promoter, then that's the reality. That's the fact of life for them. They've got to shift them somehow. It's difficult.
Right.
Steve Wood touched on it in your last episode.
Steve was on with Trish, I think.
Oh, Steve. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Trish.
I listened to. I've got that favorited though. I listen to Trish's all the time. And we were. Steve's definitely someone we get on as well, and he's one of those promoters who. Yeah, I mean, he's got his own successful engineering business, Steve, and he does it really for the love of it because he loves boxing and he loves fighters. I think he loves fighters, really. I'm sure he loves the sport too, but he just loves fighters. And he's done shows plenty of times where a fight's fallen out or something's happened, and he loses money most of the time, I think. But he's had some shows I know where he's probably lost really quite a lot, and he could have pulled the plug and limited his losses, and he's chosen not to because he knows it's like, say, it's nearly Christmas and these lads are relying on their purse for all sorts of things, and so he just goes ahead with it. Without people like that, and this is the danger now, isn't it? That small hall boxing might take a while to come back, and we'll have to see what kind of state it's in when it does, and that's what you've got to worry about, I think, because without sort of like him and like Carl Greaves over here as well, Steve Goodwin's another one in London, loads of small hall promoters. There'll be plenty in the USA as well. They need people to come when the venues open again straight away. They can't afford to have 2 or 3 shows where people are a bit undecided. They need to be straight on it immediately.
And then also we had from the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut here in the United States on Showtime. David Benavidez remains undefeated with the 10-round decision win over Alexis Angulo. But the story of that fight was that Benavidez lost his title the day before on the scale, coming in almost 3 pounds over the 168 limit. What did you think about that news when you heard about it, Andy?
I couldn't really believe it. I mean, it's 3 pounds. I mean, he's missed it by absolutely miles. And he's a strange one, Benavidez, because I covered his fight last year when he won the title again. And it's difficult to kind of work out what in a way it's not difficult to work out because he was really young when he won it the first time, and you've got to cut some slack to these to young athletes. I think it's not easy to make the best decisions when all of a sudden you've come from nowhere and you've got a lot of attention, a lot of money. It's hard. It must be hard. But you would have hoped that he might have kind of got past those kinds of errors, and this just seems like just a basic lack of professionalism, really, unless something else emerges over the next few days and there's been problems that we don't know about, because it's just it's incredible, really, to lose your title in those kinds of circumstances. I mean, weren't they talking about a fight between him and Caleb Plant last week? Wasn't that wasn't it? Because when you look at that super middleweight, when you look at the world champions, when Benavidez was one, you've got 4 different champions with the 4 different belts, all undefeated, 2 of whom are with one promoter, 2 of whom are with another, and yet nobody seems to be wanting to fight each other. Mm-hmm. It's madness, isn't it? I mean, the fight between Saunders and Smith, Matchroom don't seem that interested in that. Or they'd have done it by now. I mean, I don't know whether they were waiting to see whether one of them would get Canelo, fair enough, but I'm not sure how much appetite Saunders has got left for it, to be honest, because he knew during lockdown that there was a chance that they come calling again when it was over for him to fight Canelo, and he hadn't stayed near enough the weight to be able to get ready in 8 or 10 weeks. And if you don't want to fight him, then who do you want to fight? Because he's the biggest money fight in the division. So I just wonder whether maybe he's kind of had enough. And Callum against Canelo, it just doesn't ever really seem like that's going to happen, does it? It just seems like one of those fights where no one can really work out why it's not going to happen, because they're with the same network, with DAZN at least. But it would seem fairly sure that it isn't going to.
Right. And also on that card, I'll say another decision that's gotten a lot of scrutiny the last day or so. Rolando Romero, a.k.a. Rolly, remains undefeated at 12-0 with the 12-round unanimous decision over Jackson Martinez by scores of 116-112, 118-110, and 115-113. And this was for the interim WBA lightweight title. I know we kind of touched on this just before we came on air again, but, for our listeners, obviously, go ahead and tell them what your take on that situation was, Andy.
Well, just an absolutely hideous decision. Is really the only way to describe it. I haven't watched it in full, so I shouldn't really comment on it, I suppose. But people I know and trust, I've seen their comments on it, and it would appear that is the case. That nobody seems to be able to understand Certainly not the 118, 110, but the other two even. It sounds like it was a clear win to the other guy, and that's not the way it went, and it's what we were talking about at the start. That these are people's careers, and the interim WBA title at lightweight, that's a pretty handy title to have, because Lomachenko's got that title, and hopefully soon enough there'll be someone who's got all four belts.
Right.
And then, they might vacate a couple of them, and you might get to fight for a vacant title if you've got the WBA. That's a distinct possibility. So these situations, they cost people, and they could cost people dearly. And I don't know. What do you think? Will there be a rematch?
I don't know whether they'd want it. Because it's obviously a fight that Rolly should have lost. So if I was Rolly, I wouldn't want any rematch, because I think he'd lose a rematch. Technically watching him, some of the basic fundamentals he doesn't have a very good grasp of. I think he's really just kind of lived off, social media, that spar with Ryan Garcia where he kind of gets the best of Ryan, and being under Floyd Mayweather's managed to get him as far as he can. So I think he'll try and make as much money as he can before, he faces an actual champion. I think anybody in the top 10 would school him, in my opinion. He's got a puncher's chance. He has, that one punch knockout ability, but, facing the Teofimo Lopez or a Lomachenko, I think Lomachenko would embarrass him.
Do you think Lopez could beat Lomachenko?
When those two fight, I like both fighters. I think if Loma has anything left, unless he's got old over this last year of being out of the ring, I think Loma wins, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. We talked about that before. I think Lopez. I think it's an intriguing matchup. I think Lopez is a great fighter. Obviously, he's shown that he has some talent, but I think that he hasn't fought anybody near the level of a Lomachenko. Lomachenko is, it's just on a different level compared to these other fighters. Lopez has, showed that he could fight, he could win, he could be in competitive fights and really show his talent, and fought some high level guys. But I think everybody can recognize that Lomachenko is above levels of everybody else in at the 135 division and 130 for that matter.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I do think that somebody will beat him, unless, of course, he gets the timing of his retirement absolutely right. But he's been boxing a really long time, and I think there are some signs of wear and tear. And maybe there is somebody out there who can beat him, whether it's a super featherweight. It's a little bit annoying to hear Shakur Stevenson say the other day that he does want to fight Lomachenko, but not for 5 years. He's not going to be around in 5 years, is he? The good thing about Lopez, and I know that he's got that belt, and they're both with Top Rank, and he's kind of just going to have to take that fight whether he really wants to or not, in a way, as much as you ever have to. He does seem like he wants to, whereas some of the others just don't really seem like they want to. Gervonta Davis gives it the big one about Lomachenko, but doesn't really seem to want to fight him. So full respect to anybody who's really up for it. Luke Campbell was up for it and did well, but ultimately lost wide on the cards. But yeah, I think maybe somebody will get him before the end, but not totally sure who it will be.
I think if Teofimo does beat him, I think it'll just be down to, he catches him, like Linares did, caught him coming in, maybe knocks him out because he's obviously got some good power. But I think it's just unfortunate that Lomachenko doesn't have the stature that he can move up, several weight divisions. Because if you look at what he's done, Luke Campbell, Crawler, Pedraza, Linares, Rigondeaux at the time was supposed to be the 2 pound-for-pound best. And then as soon as he beat Rigo, everyone's like, oh, well, Rigo's too small. He was too small. He was never going to win. But at the time, everyone was saying it was, the 2 best fighters out there. Gary Russell Jr., his only defeat is to Lomachenko. Nicholas Walters, he managed to knock him off the face of the earth. We haven't seen Nicholas Walters since.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's I can't argue with any of that. It is a shame because, but I'm also pleased that he's resisted the temptation to. Because a lot of the time when people are doing that well, people just seem to want to see them get beaten. And and just want to see them step up higher and higher in weight till it gets to the point where they will lose. And there is always that point. And Mayweather resisted it. You know, people will say, "Oh, why don't you fight Golovkin?" And you just think, "Why don't?" You know, it's not his weight division. So I'm happy that he hasn't done that. But there just haven't been that many people around. There have been the great fights, like you said, like you listed there. But I think that's why it'd be good to see someone like, you know, Gervonta Davis step up and want to fight him, because I think he would, at super featherweight, because that's where he should be. If he really trained, you know, was really, really zoned in, he's the one I would give the best chance to, I reckon. Mm-hmm. But I don't particularly want to see it happen necessarily. But yeah, you just don't want to see him get beaten because he's old or because he's too small. You just want someone, if someone's going to do it, you want someone to actually really do it.
Right. The one we missed was the Mikey Garcia fight.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was the one that got away, wasn't it? And that was a real shame, because it looked like Garcia wasn't going to do it. Then he you know, he came back down to lightweight, didn't he? When nobody really thought he would, and then it looked like he was going to do it, and then he's obviously not going to do it. I mean, that's a kind of I find that move up to welterweight a bit odd, because I just don't think he is one. But the problem is he is now, because he's been there for too long, that it would probably be it'd be possible for him to get back down to lightweight now. It'd probably be quite hard to get down to super lightweight. I guess he made a lot of money against Errol Spence, I would think. But it's, yeah, I mean, that's a rock hard division. I don't see him beating. I don't see him beating Spence, which obviously he didn't. I don't see him beating Crawford. I don't see him beating Sean Porter or Keith Thurman or Manny Pacquiao or Danny Garcia. So that puts him, about 7th or 8th?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the money.
Yeah, that's it. It's prize fighting, isn't it, after all?
Prize fighting. Also rounding out that Showtime card, Otto Wallin gets the 5th round TKO over Travis Kaufman, who injured his left shoulder during the fight and actually retired after the fight. So it looks like Wallin beat him into retirement. What did you think about his performance, Andy?
I like Otto Wallin, because I saw him quite a bit in when I used to do these Sauerland cards. They used to have Nordic fight nights, basically. So they would do shows in Denmark, Sweden. Yeah, Denmark and Sweden pretty much all of the time, and Otto Wallin Swedish. And Joey Gamache went over to Europe to be Sauerland's main trainer, basically. So he was training a few of their guys, and he was training Otto, and still does. And so I used to see them around quite a bit, and I saw him fight a couple of times. I had a couple of quite long sit-downs with Joey Gamache, because it's like I was saying before, you've got these times where you're sitting around and you're not doing anything. And, you know, I recognise him, obviously, and so I know who he is, and I know that he speaks English, and he's happy just to sit around and talk for ages because there's nothing else to do. And so when Wallin got that Fury fight, I kind of went into bat for Wallin a bit on Twitter, because people were saying, "Oh, Fury, you know, he's fighting this guy, he's rubbish. You know, he's all the things that they call fighters." And I said, steady on, like, he's not that. I'm not saying he's a world beater, but he's not, he's a lot better than Tom Schwartz. He's been over for sparring with AJ and various people. It'd be interesting to see how he does. Mm-hmm. And he did way better than people thought he would, because he opened up that cut. And, you can make a strong argument for the fact that he should have won that fight, because maybe the referee should have stopped it. But we all know how those things go. But yeah, I like him. They're kind of a funny pair, aren't they? Joey Gamache still trains him, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of an odd couple, aren't they? Because Joey's small and kind of quite animated when you speak to him, but quite kind of calm and serene the rest of the time. And Otto's just this 6'5" Swedish southpaw. You get these mad marriages in boxing. But yeah, it's funny when you see someone early on, and he was boxing 4 or 6 rounders before there was anyone really there on some show in like Friedrichshafen in the middle of nowhere in Denmark or wherever it was. And then all of a sudden they're on this big stage, and you just think, you just feel kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I actually know a bit about this guy. And then you realise just how keen people are to say that someone's shit just because you've heard of him. It's just like, I haven't heard of him. He must be shit. And you just think, wow, what a way to live your life that is. That unless you've heard of someone, It must be whatever they do, they're shit at it. I mean, yeah, but yeah. So it was good to see him do well against Fury. I enjoyed that.
Getting towards the end of the show here, we have fight previews of this weekend, this 22nd of August, Matchroom Fight Camp, the finale of the Fight Camp series of Eddie Hearn Matchroom Boxing on DAZN. Headlined by Dillian Whyte versus Alexander Povetkin for the interim WBC and WBC Diamond titles. What do you think about that card, Andy?
So for this one, I was just finishing off the notes for it today. So I think I fancy Dillian Whyte to beat Povetkin. He didn't look great in Saudi Arabia against Marius Vac, but there were reasons for that. He came in heavy. He had the announcement with he finally got cleared of any wrongdoing by the authorities, and you could see when you saw him around. It wasn't like he didn't want to be there, but he could have lived without it. Put it that way. But he got the win, and that was really all that mattered. On the same card, I thought Povetkin was lucky against Michael Hunter. I scored that for us, and I gave it to Hunter 115, 113. And actually, when I watched it back, I think I got a round wrong, and I probably should have had it 116, 112. I thought it was quite clear. And he got the draw there, Povetkin, which was a stroke of luck for him. You could tell at the end that he didn't think he'd won.
Nearly got knocked out.
Yeah. I mean, he's 40 now, and he's had a great little kind of Indian summer in that this is his fifth Matchroom and Sky pay-per-view in a row, because they put him on the one before AJ, then he had AJ, then he's been on two more since. So, but whilst he's, fit and healthy, he may as well keep going, because he's not getting a real shellacking off anyone. Even against Anthony, he did well and then got knocked out. But I think the age will count against him in that one. With Taylor Pursoon, I think that Taylor will have learned a lot from that first fight, and I'm not sure that Pursoon can really do anything any different. But if she's got the same gas tank that she used to have, then she'll be a massive handful, because there's a big debate over here at the minute, particularly recently, about whether female pros should box 3-minute rounds or 2-minute rounds. And the fact of the matter is, you apply to the commission, you get your opponent to agree, you agree with the promoter, you apply to the commission. It's as simple as that. And everybody kind of assumes, surely they'll all want to box 3-minute rounds, but not necessarily. Someone like Pursoon, maybe not, because she can go like a lunatic for 2 minutes, recover in that minute between rounds and do that 10 times, whereas maybe you can't do that for 3 minutes. But I think Katie will have learned enough and she'll win that fight. Luther Clay against Chris Congo, you probably won't. You might have, Michael, I guess. Danny, you almost certainly won't have heard of either of those two, I wouldn't have thought. So Chris Congo was a good GB fighter and good amateur, trained with a GB setup. He's training with Jim McDonnell now. He's been signed by Dillian Whyte, who manages him. He's a very good, technically correct fighter. Maybe lacks a bit of pop, but he's a good kind of technician. Luther Clay, opposite kind of route. Came over from South Africa when he was a kid. Sells some tickets. Has worked hard at that. Went to Italy and won the WBO global title last October against the odds, so took that in the away corner. That was his chance, really. If he'd lost that fight, then it wouldn't have been over for him. But opportunities like that are kind of once in a lifetime, really, for fighters who come from where he's come from. And he won, so he defends that. That should be a good fight. We've got a good super middleweight fight with Jack Cullen and Zach Chelly. So Jack Cullen was the English middleweight champion. Fought Felix Cash for the Commonwealth last year. Really, really good fight, but lost. And now he stepped up to super middleweight, which, given that he's 6'3", is probably quite a good move. He just comes to fight like he just throws relentlessly, bit open. Zach Chelly punches hard as well. He's 7-1, so I think he's 18-2. Cullen, Chelly's 7-1. That should be interesting. And we've got Alan Babic as well, who's been added to the card. I'm a big Babic fan. Like, he hasn't really boxed anyone yet, but he boxed for Croatia as an amateur, boxed in WSB. He's been signed by Dillian Whyte. They've been sparring a lot in the build-up to this. He did a bit of a number on Agit Kabayel, apparently, in sparring one time, and Dillian saw it or heard about it, and that's why he signed him. And he's really fun. Like, he speaks good English. He's got a good sense of humour. And when we had him over last July, he won. He beat this French bare knuckle fighter called Morgan Dassault, who we've had a couple of times, who always threatens to really bring it, and then don't know what he does during fight week, but whatever it is not conducive to a good performance on fight night, because I've heard some rumours about what he has to. Things that weaken the legs, shall we say, on the day of the fight, on the afternoon of the fight, I was told at one point. Anyway, so he beat him, and then in the post-fight interview, he just gave a great line to Andy, where he just said, you know, I will fight anyone. I just love to smash. You know, just brilliant, you know. That stuff like that can only help you. So it should be good, yeah. Like top to bottom, it should be good. People having a little bit of a moan about it. They're saying, "Oh, pay-per-view" and all the rest of it. And I understand that. And ideally, you'd have 5 unbelievable fights. But given the circumstances, I think it's not exactly a co-main event, because Whyte versus Povetkin is a bigger fight than Taylor versus Bassoon in terms of public interest. But to get them both on the same bill. It's great. I mean, it was supposed to be Taylor Serrano, and I was really interested in that, but they just couldn't get it over the line the second time. I'm not really sure why.
Any news, Andy, on the Dillian Whyte-Mark Tibbs split?
Well, what Dillian says is that Dillian used to train at Loughborough University. He had a kind of deal going with them, and then he did that for the Rivas fight. I'm not sure if he did it for Maris Vac or not. I think he was in a few different places, and for this one, he, I think, was already in Portugal because it was supposed to be May the 2nd. I think he'd already moved basically from Loughborough to Portugal for the original date. So he'd gone out there already before lockdown started, and he's basically been there since, I think. And so he said to Mark, you know, I'm going to need you to come over to Portugal. And he did for a bit. And then he said, look, I'm opening a gym at home. I need to get home and see my family. Difficult being away at the minute because of lockdown and Corona and all this kind of stuff. And so he went back, and as far as Dillian was concerned, that was kind of it then. And then I think he said, oh, but I can, then later on he said, all right, I need to come back now. We're 3 weeks out. And then Dillian said, well, that's not how this is going to work, you know, but you needed to be here for the whole thing or not at all. I thought that was kind of clear. So it looks like there was some kind of breakdown in communication, and Mark wasn't that happy about it. He did some interviews. Dillian wasn't that happy about him doing the interviews. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but he's got Xavier Miller training him, who was in his corner last time, who runs a gym in London, who he knows pretty well. But I think they've been a great partnership, him and Mark Tibbs. I think it's a real shame. It's a real shame. And, you know, Richard Riakpor's not being trained by Mark anymore either. He's gone to Angel Fernandez, who's a really good trainer, good up-and-coming trainer. But I thought Mark Tibbs particularly did really well with him. And he's a really nice bloke too, so you don't want to see them. They both are. You don't want to see these partnerships kind of split up. But I think when you get to a certain age, maybe it's not that everybody needs a trainer, of course, but I think you sort of are what you are by the time you're 31, 32. And I think Mark's definitely got the best out of what he is, what Dillian is. But I think somebody else can probably do that as well.
Do you think we'll see him move to a bigger name away from Xavier Miller eventually? Do you think after this fight we may see him with another Ben Davidson or?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, because with the circumstances of this, I think it sort of had to be that whoever was leading the corner for this one kind of had to be someone who was already there,
you
know, in camp with him. So, yeah, maybe that's a possibility. I mean, Ben Davidson's got Josh Taylor now. So that was a big name for him to pick up. And he's dealt with Fury, you know, who's older than him and a big name. So he's shown that he can do that kind of thing. I'd be surprised if those two teamed up, not for any particular reason, but I just think that maybe, I don't know, it's not impossible that he might just stick with Xavier because he's someone he knows, you know, he's one of his inner circle. I wonder how much longer he kind of wants to hang around in boxing, Dillian. I think he wants to fight for a world title and win a world title and make as much money as he possibly can. But I wouldn't necessarily say that he wants to do it for years longer. I don't get that impression.
And then last major event of this weekend from the bubble at the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. On ESPN Plus, Eleider Alvarez, 25-1, goes up against Joe Smith Jr. in a WBO light heavyweight eliminator. What do you think about that, Andy, and that card?
I like that fight. I mean, that just seems like a good match to me. That seems like a good match. So the interesting thing about that from our point of view is that after Anthony Yarde lost to Sergey Kovalev, he then quite quickly, or towards the end of the year, got himself a fight in Spain. And most people wondering, what's he done that for? But it was basically so that he could get a win in case something opened up for him with the WBO, because Canelo's vacated that belt, hasn't he?
Right, I believe so, yeah.
WBO light heavyweight title. So is that vacant?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Ramirez would have gone into mandatory, wouldn't he, when he moved on to super middleweight? But yeah, I think nobody's got it. So we're looking. I think Yarde will be looking to try and get himself a shot at that again as soon as he can. So Eleider Alvarez against Joe Smith. It's kind of difficult to pick. I mean, Alvarez has got that good amateur background. He came up from Colombia with Rivas, didn't he, to Canada from Colombia with Rivas to Yvonne Michel, and obviously beat Kovalev. And he's looked neat and tidy and decent whenever I've seen him. And Joe Smith, kind of blue collar guy, isn't he, who didn't have that kind of route, but gets the job done. And I would maybe kind of fancy Smith in that fight, to be honest. Out of the two of those, I would maybe pick him. But I'll definitely watch that one. It's a good fight, that.
And also on that card, Rob Brandt, 25-2, goes up against Vitaly Koplenko. I hope I'm saying that right. Brandt is now working with Bo McIntyre, who also trains Terrence Crawford. What do you think about Rob Brandt's upcoming performance, Andy?
Well, I mean, he's got quite a good story, hasn't he, Rob Brandt? I think. Because obviously he had the title for a while, and I remember reading about him, and there was a few guys circling around at the same time who I didn't know that much about, and then I checked them out, and you get into it, and you're like, Cancio was another one. I didn't know much about him, Andrew Cancio, and I remember, he had those great wins, and I remember reading about him, and Brandt was kind of in that category. Jamel Herring at the same time too, a name that I'd heard around a lot, but I didn't actually realise. I don't really know much about him. So I kind of read up on those guys. I guess it depends with him really as to how the hunger. It comes down to hunger, really, doesn't it? A lot of the time, particularly when you've kind of got up there before. Would it be fair to say with him that he wasn't really expected to?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, he beat Murata.
That's not me dissing him. It's just that when you've done it once, so I guess maybe when it makes it a bit harder to do it again, I think.
Yeah, it was definitely a shock when he beat Murata, and obviously Murata then got the rematch and took it back off him.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of love that, because sometimes you get the feeling, don't you? And it was sort of the same with Cancio, where you just think nobody really wanted him to win. And they didn't even try and pretend that they didn't want him to win, because you have this mad situation where, he'd beaten the man to become WBA champion. And then all of a sudden, rather than being promoted to super champion, they allowed Vontae Davis to box for a vacant super title and keep him down at regular. And you just think, I hope he got well paid for whilst he was up there, Cancio, because I know that he kept his job and, he was working on the roads, wasn't he?
Right.
And you just think, I mean, just the lack of respect shown to someone is just absolutely incredible. And Brandt was it was a sort of similar scenario, wasn't it? It was just like, oh, God, that's a spanner in the works for everybody that he's won.
Because they were trying to make the Triple G fight.
Right. Yeah. You got to love it, though, when you see those kinds of fighters win.
Right.
Know what they've had to put up with to get there. I mean, it just must be a mad feeling when you've got the belt. But me and Matt were talking to Joe Gallagher about this earlier. Just kind of in America, particularly, he was saying that because he's well known for his mind games over here, Joe, like a psychological kind of warfare and people up, because people don't really do it here. You see, he's one of the few people who does it, and he really does do it. But he was saying in America, everybody does it. Weigh-in week, fight week, if you're the kind of fancied fighter, you just get treated so much better than the bloke you're fighting. And that can even apply if you can even be the unfancied fighter when you're the champion, which is what happened to some of these guys. It's yeah. I mean, it seems like you talk about boxing being kind of like the Wild West a bit, but it seems more like that in the US in terms of the strokes that people will try and pull, which is just kind of all adds to the entertainment in a way. Yeah, in a way, I guess.
And then rounding off that card, Battle of the Rodriguez fighters. Julian Rodriguez, 19-0, goes up against Anthony Rodriguez, 13-0. Well, I don't think they're related, but who knows? And then Clay Collard, 8-2-3, goes up against Maurice Williams. Collard has been getting a lot of attention over here, especially on boxing Twitter and stuff like that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but wasn't he a former MMA fighter?
He was a UFC fighter who turned pro and then literally kind of just went in there upsetting the apple cart, not realizing the B-side's supposed to lose. So he ended up, I think he defeated 4 or 5 unbeaten fighters on the bounce. And then Top Rank were like, well, we might as well put some emphasis behind him. And now he's kind of the A-side. So he's in there against Maurice Williams, who's 7-1. But I think it's, they've kind of realized he's got a little bit of a following on Twitter. So they're kind of pushing him now.
Yeah, reading about him a couple of weeks ago, I think somebody did something about him in Boxing News over here, and exactly what you just said. Like I think he was struggling to get fights in UFC as well, wasn't he? And that can be. I don't really know anything about MMA, to be honest. But as I understand it, one of the downsides with having a main kind of governing promoter, I guess UFC's a promoter, really, aren't they?
Right.
Mm-hmm. With having one person in charge, basically, there are upsides, but the downside is that if you're not really in favour, then you never fight. And I think that was kind of where he was. So he just decided to give boxing a try, and yeah, like you say, he's really well prepared. He comes in shape. He can fight, and he's not read the script. And people love that. It's great when you see fighters do that. We have them over here. They generally don't win all that often, but sometimes. They really fancy it, and it's great to see them kind of. It sounds a bit cruel, but it's great to see them kind of like tear into someone who maybe has had it all their own way and has had their record built up and get a bit of a rude awakening. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens now. They've kind of flipped it, and he's in the home corner. I'm guessing he's not under any pressure to sell tickets or anything like that, but he might not like it. He might prefer it the other way around. He might prefer just the lack of pressure of taking tough jobs where people now think he might win, but they're not necessarily expecting him to win. I think that can do something to you, because we like David Allen over here, for example, he's kind of similar in a way. I mean, he hasn't got the MMA, background to speak of, but he took a whole load of really hard fights, like Dillian Whyte, Tony Yoka, Luis Ortiz, went rounds, showed how tough he was. And then they put him in a fight that he was supposed to win against Lenroy Thomas in Sheffield. And he just kind of froze, really, and lost. Because the switch from going from no one really is giving me a chance here to this is it, this is what that was all for, was just a bit too much for him on the night in the end. But, I mean, I don't know Collard. He might be completely the other way. He might be absolutely mad for it.
Right. Yeah, only one way to find out. And then also rounding off that card, Duke Reagan making his pro debut against Luis Alvarado. Reagan is a former U.S. amateur star from Cincinnati, Ohio. And he's also making his pro debut. Mike, is he actually officially signed by Top Rank?
Yeah, he was officially signed by Top Rank recently. On all the press releases that came out, they were kind of, pushing him. So hopefully he'll be another, breakout U.S. star. So only time will tell.
Yeah, I saw him at the World Championships in Hamburg in 2017. He didn't, I think he was too young for Rio, but the year before, but he came through in that competition. And I just thought he looked really good. You could tell straight away that he was a quality fighter, and one that you were looking at and thinking, yeah, when Tokyo comes around, and maybe it's the extra year, maybe it's obviously if it had been this year, he'd have gone. I'm sure he would have gone. I'm totally sure he'd have qualified. Well, as sure as you can be that he would have qualified. And then in that division, I think he would have had a real shot, because there have been some really good fighters at 56 kilos, but a lot of them left after the last Olympics. So Ramirez, the Cuban, Rabesi Ramirez, Shakur Stevenson, obviously, Michael Conlon, Nick Eaton would be another one. You know, there was a gap there for someone to step in and fill it, and it did look like it was going to be him. So I'm sure Team USA are absolutely gutted that he's gone, but it's probably a result of he just doesn't want to wait another year. And yeah, I mean, I generally think that amateur schooling's great, but if you stay too long, then by the time you turn pro, you've got to do what someone like Madrimov does. Not that he's that old, but you've got to move quick because you haven't really got any time to make any mistakes. Like our guys who turned over after Rio, they're all now kind of late 20s and just exit feet at that point. Like Joe Joyce, for example, he was like early 30s. He's 34, 35 now. Right. And that old when you turn pro means that you can't really afford any mistakes. So if he loses to Daniel Dubois, I mean, he's kind of finished almost, really, in terms of getting a world title shot. But if you go young, you know, it's you just got more time.
Right.
He looked good. He looked really good, I thought.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, I said you have officially broken the record on our show. You've been the longest guest we've had on this show by far.
Oh, so, God. Really? Sorry.
No. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, like, we're just glad that you're able to talk boxing and you know, you have the knowledge and you know, to talk about even the most the smaller undercard fights. But it's great.
Get me back on. You need to work out some kind of system where you can give me some kind of distress signal if it's going on for too long, and I'll.
No, absolutely not. We're fine with it. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if you're doing a boxing podcast, obviously you have to be a pretty big fan of the sport to put in you know, a weekly podcast like we do. So, you know, we're fine with it, man. You know, as long as you're okay, as long as our guests are okay with it, we're more than happy to oblige.
Cool. Yeah, it's great. It's great fun just to sit and chat. And yeah, Sunday night back here, I really don't have better things to do. So I very rarely have better things to do, to be honest. That's a little window into my life.
Right. Well, before we sign off here, Andy, go ahead and plug, you know, your social media, and then, you know, obviously Sky Sports. Anything upcoming that you got planned right now?
So yeah, I mean, yeah, Sky's got the bill coming up on pay-per-view coming up on the weekend. Twitter, I'm at Mr. Andy Clarke. Anyone who's polite will always get out of me. Instagram, I think I'm the same, but I don't really use it much, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm always up for a chat on Twitter. You know, it still can be a sensible place. A
little bit,
not, but it still can be a sensible place at times. But and yeah, Macklin's Take, me and Matt do our podcast. You can find that on iTunes and Spotify and stuff like that. And it's not that dissimilar to yours. So if this is your bag, then check that out too.
Who have you got coming up on there, Andy?
So we did Joe Gallagher today. Just talking about mind games and stuff like that, because that fight, Tasha Jonas against Terry Harper, was quite interesting because he just thought, you know, he really rattled a few cages. He started trying to get at Steffi Ball and putting out stories that she'd been knocked out in sparring, which I think he just completely made up. But, you know, it got them going. It got a rise out of them. He's very, very good at that. And like I said before, in here, people don't really do it. Everyone's quite kind of nicey. And he's talking a bit as well about how here visiting fighters get treated amazingly well. And we're kind of quite proud of that. Whereas visiting fighters in the USA, I remember French telling me that when he went to fight Jermaine Taylor, his dressing room was tiny and freezing cold. They went to watch Taylor get his hands wrapped. His is massive and really warm, and he was the challenger. They dragged him out of the changing room 15 minutes before they said they would, then just left him in a holding area for 25 minutes. Just all these kinds of things, you know, we don't do that. We don't do those things. I think we should do them because, you know, if you're at home, you should get the advantage. But he just got into all of that. Yeah, it was good crack.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, before we sign off right here, I'll go ahead where they can, our listeners can follow us.
We're at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. And then obviously join us next week. We'll be reviewing the Matchroom card, the Dylan Whyte and Katie Taylor fights.
Absolutely. So for our guest of the week and Mr. Andy Clarke of Sky Sports, for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is the Last Round Podcast.